Welcome everyone. We are gathered to discuss critical intersection, the evolution of human rights in the digital and restricted landscape. And the urgency of this topic cannot be overstated. As a technological surveillance and shrinking civic space present unprecedented challenges to fundamental freedoms we strive to protect. Today, we will define the scope of our discussion around the strategic role of national human rights institutions and their collaboration with the civil society to navigate these complexities. Our first speaker is Ms. Alison Kilpatrick, Chief Commissioner of the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission and Secretary of Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions. She has held this position since September 2021, and she's an expert in public law and human rights litigation. She has extensive experience representing litigations in high-profile cases involving the protection of individual rights, including the rights of transgender children, the establishment of service sites for Irish travellers, and application of the Human Rights Act to private contracts. Prior to her appointment as Chief Commissioner, Alison served in several high-level advisory capacities. She was the independent human rights legal advisor to the Northern Ireland Policing Board for 8 years and a special legal advisor to the United Kingdom's independent reviewer of terrorism legislation. Her international work includes serving on the Irish government's delegation to Timor-Leste regarding UN Security Council Resolution 1325, where she provided recommendations on policing oversight and military contact. An accomplished author and researcher, Alison has published widely on discrimination and housing law, including the Human Rights Act 1988, a practitioner's guide. Her career is marked by commitment to social justice and systemic reform, having led independent inspections of an Carta, Siona, and reviewed the ECHR compliance of legacy investigations under Operation Canova. She holds law degrees from Queen's University Belfast, the Inns of Court School of London, and College of Europe, Bruce. Our second speaker is Mr. Honunjan Setun, is a commissioner of the National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia, having served as a commissioner's chair from 2020 to 2023. He works extensively with the regional human rights mechanisms, previously serving as the deputy chair of the Asia Pacific Forum's Governance Committee and as an executive committee member of Law Asia. Throughout his 20-year career, Honung has specialized in the intersection of the judiciary and human rights protection. He has led several high-level initiatives for the United Nations Development Programme, including projects focused on legal empowerment and access to justice. His leadership was instrumental in the establishment of Mongolia's national free legal aid mechanism and inauguration of the annual Lawyers Pro Bono Day. An expert researcher, he has authored comprehensive studies on judicial independence, child protection mechanisms, and the domestic application of international human rights treaties. Hong holds LLM from Eötvös Loránd University in Hungary and previously served as the president of Mongolian Bar Association. Our next speaker is Mrs. Orunsoch Pomsuran. She's a human rights activist advocate for ecological sustainability and community-based development with 25 years of experience. She established the Center for Human Rights and Development in 1998, together with the like-minded colleagues. Since then, she has been active in organizing and mobilizing grassroots communities and CSOs in different provinces of Mongolia for the protection of right to food, healthy and safe environment, and facilitated them for policy advocacy. In 2017, she initiated the networking of national CSOs working on human rights, environment, and social service, and established a national network of civil society organizations for sustainable development. Currently, the center hosts the network, and Orunsoch serves as a national coordinator of the network. She's associated with the different national, regional, and global CSOs networks for democracy, human rights, ecological sustainability, and justice for all. And our last speaker is Ms. Huawei Wei, is a Senior Program Officer for National Human Rights Institutions Program at the Forum Asia and the coordinator of the Asian Non-Governmental Organizations Network on National Human Rights Institutions, shortly ANIN. She works closely with the network of 30 human rights defenders and civil society organizations across Asia to strengthen the independence, effectiveness, and mandate of national human rights institutions in the region. Prior to joining Forum Asia, Wei Wei worked at the Office of United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva and Manila. Now, allow me to hand the floor to Ms. Alison Kilpatrick. Due to her commitment in Strasbourg, she prepared and sent us the video statement for this session.
Always. Always.
Let me start with a few. Hello, thank you for the invitation to speak today. It's my honour to contribute to this important and timely discussion. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person. Maybe I'll get another opportunity. It's particularly inspiring that this is student-led because today's students will be dealing with the challenges presented by technology and developing solutions to the problems that are bound to arise. Having said that, human rights, despite their origins so many years ago, are well equipped to navigate us through this next phase. But before applying a human rights approach to technology, let me start with a few basics. One must understand and truly accept their fundamental importance and application before using them in this technological world. A central promise of the European Compact was the guarantee of true equality. Those who drafted the convention knew that if future horror was to be prevented, human beings had to be protected for no reason other than their humanity, as in their membership of the human species. Nothing else was required. Civil rights and freedoms were of special significance, with human rights running through everything that followed, together with transparency and accountability structures that would keep every government and public authority on track, honouring its commitments. If human rights are properly understood, they should be protected by the state, whether they're likely to get caught or not. That's because human rights compliance brings its own rewards. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is not sentimental. Its drafters were not naive idealists, they were hard-nosed realists. It makes plain that disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which outraged the conscience of mankind. I grew up in a place that understands a little of barbarous acts. In Northern Ireland, a fresh commitment to human rights and equality brought us out of 30 years of a brutal conflict. Keeps us safe. But in Northern Ireland, we are seeing regression, suspicion, and populism put our positive human rights culture in the dark. Our Commission has had to litigate a number of issues through the courts, and our power to litigate in our own name has been key. Individuals should not be relied upon to litigate violations suffered by them. It should not be left to them to spend the time, resources, and emotional strength required to take a case to court. Nor do they have to prove that they've earned their rights. Why would they, if it is fundamental rights we're talking about? Democracy is not a numbers game, it's about attaching value to each individual, even if, particularly if, they do not form part of the majority. The state's human rights responsibilities extend equally to the isolated, the vulnerable, the disenfranchised. But for those people to enjoy their rights equally, a little more is often required to level up, as the famous catchphrase went. Most states accept they must protect the rule of law, that they have a duty to protect national security, but sometimes are less clear that that necessarily means protecting the human rights of all its people. The state must protect our rights when we can't or don't know how to protect them for ourselves. Otherwise, what is a modern state for? Human rights defenders often identify and advocate for people or issues that are unpopular, but which raise human rights concerns. That can pitch us against government or even against public opinion. We can be accused of being political, of being naive, or of being awkward and not towing the line. The more we are told that, the more important it is to push back. The rule of law, much quoted but not always respected, underpins a healthy democracy with peace and justice running through its veins, in which each human being has a voice as well as a vote. People must be able to influence government thinking and bring about change, but always within the strictures of the rule of law, which values everyone equally. And that can sound trite, cheesy even, but it's increasingly rare to hear those in power saying it. It will come as no surprise that I suggest that human rights compliance, which is framed by internationally agreed principles, made enforceable domestically, is a critical component of the rule of law, without which there is little value. And it should transcend the law and the lawmakers. It extends beyond borders and applies to visitors as well as citizens. During the conflict in Northern Ireland, corners were cut, rules were broken, and law enforcers became law breakers. The argument went, the more you protect human rights, the less equipped the state is to keep us safe. But that's a fallacy. It's dishonest but persuasive. It is a narrative that can take hold. We can be convinced that rights and security are in an inverse relationship. In Northern Ireland, we learned that the hard way. It does not work. It only ever makes things worse. One day, society must account for human rights breaches, even during conflict. Society takes years to recover if its own government does not live by the rule of law. The rule of law, of which human rights are a central plank, is fragile. I've been honoured to serve as the Vice Chair of the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions, made up of 119 states across Europe, the Americas, Africa and Asia Pacific. The commitment to human rights varies across the regions, but a common thread between societies who now cherish international norms is a background of conflict. And I think that tells us something. They dare not squander the gains already made. So let me go to technology now. Technology must be approached from a fundamental rights perspective, which sounds simple. However, we only understand the real impact on rights if we truly understand the technology. We must understand its reach, its uses, its potential for exploitation by bad actors, and its potential to do good. That means human rights defenders must collaborate closely with the scientists, engineers, the coders and the visionaries who are constantly pushing the limits. If we don't, we will be outwitted, and those who lose out first will be the most isolated, vulnerable, marginalised and disadvantaged in society. Precisely those people who we as human rights defenders are charged with protecting. If those who are developing and sharing the technology don't approach their work with a sense of responsibility and deference to its impact on rights, we will end up with a society that is unrecognisable, with rights violations going unchecked and the technology itself becoming a source of suspicion, resentment and fear for its users. Because AI has already and will increasingly become indispensable, controlling our every move, we must be ready. Several steps have already been taken, such as the European Union's AI Act and the Council of Europe's Framework Convention on AI. Among other things, they require fundamental rights impact assessments, with very new development using a methodology called Huderia, developed by the Council of Europe's Committee on Artificial Intelligence. They are valuable tools to assess and mitigate AI-related risks. They are all available with some guidance on their website. Making these assessments meaningful and effective requires expertise and strong oversight. We must together develop robust guidance and tools to support the effective implementation of fundamental rights impact assessments, and this should be done in close cooperation with stakeholders, including, I would suggest, particularly national human rights institutions. Europe is doing a lot, but it has much farther to travel. What we still need are truly effective standards, not bureaucratic exercises. The only way we'll be fit to respond to the new challenges is if we recognise our own weaknesses and embrace others' strengths. None of us can manage this alone. The global dimension is increasingly significant. Threats such as digital disinformation, coordinated harassment of civil society, misuse of artificial intelligence in electoral contexts, and cross-border influence operations do not respect national borders. Through the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions, NHRIs exchange best practice and institutional experience and assess emerging human rights risks. Thereafter, they develop coordinated action at the national, regional and international levels. For example, GANRI's 2026 annual conference will focus on the role of NHRIs in promoting human rights in the digital space, reflecting the growing recognition that digital technologies have significant implications for the protection and enjoyment of human rights worldwide. So having given that overview, I will finish with a few specific examples of what's happening. At home, we adopted recommendations for the UN Convention for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, urging government to ensure the design, development, deployment and use of AI systems and biometric surveillance technologies, including facial recognition, comply with international human rights standards. This is particularly important to protect individuals from discrimination or profiling based on race, colour, descent or national or ethnic origin. The UN Human Rights Committee has recommended ending the use of facial recognition and other mass surveillance technologies by law enforcement, particularly at protests. It's necessary for the protection of rights such as privacy, non-discrimination, freedom of expression, association and assembly rights, all of which are quite difficult to enjoy in practice. Our own policing board here in Northern Ireland has raised concerns that live facial recognition technology powered by AI has the potential to be discriminatory, as image data banks often contain more white faces, increasing the risk of biased outcomes. That's a report that's available also on their website. We've highlighted the need for regulators to identify and address discrimination arising from algorithms and data-driven technology, and to tackle intersectional and multiple discrimination. We've advised and are monitoring data protection as a fundamental right. In particular, we've raised concern about proposed changes to automated decision-making and data processing, cautioning that weakening data protection could threaten rights and cross-border cooperation, and ultimately our treasured national security. When dealing with technology that has as its unique selling point its ability to mimic human behaviour without any of the inhibitions such as shame, regret, remorse and compassion, we must find a way to regulate it that has all the values built in. Just because a thing can be done doesn't mean it should be done. Ethical considerations inform the ECHR. Human need and development inform case law of the ECHR. Value judgment must rein in our worst instincts. And where do we get those values from? Well, as I started out, from the universally applicable framework of standards that have protected us for over 7 decades. They have not run their course. They are as critical now as ever. Instead of celebrating progress for its own sake or for its potential to bring financial reward to developers, we must analyse the risks and potential rewards. If we are to maximise the latter and reduce the former, we must collaborate across the globe with civil society, academia, law, politics, in a spirit of mutual respect. Volker Turk, High Commissioner for Human Rights, said in 2024, our 2 worlds, the world of technological expertise along the domain of standard developing organisations and the world of human rights are moving closer. There is no magic potion that will provide a solution to this complex challenge. Developing standards is hard work, as is understanding human rights and translating them into practice. It is hard work, but it has got to be done. Eleanor Roosevelt spoke of human rights being found in the small places close to home. Technology invades those small places. It is in our homes, doing everything from educating our children, diagnosing our conditions, dominating our leisure time, and shaping public opinion. It can be positive, and we can make that more likely if we continue to view all of it through a human rights lens. The fact that Essex Human Rights Centre is on it and pulling together so many people is extremely encouraging, and that you're doing it deliberately from a global perspective is inspiring. I really look forward to following the work you're doing. Thank you so much.
Really appreciate the contribution from the Miss Alison Kilpatrick, and in her speech, she emphasized that the long-standing framework of universal human rights remains essential for navigating the complex challenges posed by the modern technology. As such, she argues that the rule of law must prioritize the protection of all individuals, particularly the vulnerable and marginalized, who are most at the risk of exploitation by unregulated digital advancements. Drawing on Northern Ireland history, she warns against the policy that human rights and national security are in an inverse relationship, noting that the weakening rights only exacerbates conflict and societal harm. And so Ms. Kilpatrick advocates for mandatory fundamental rights impact assessments for artificial intelligence and biometric technologies to prevent discriminatory outcomes and ensure that those tools mimic human values such as compassion and accountability. Ultimately, she calls for close global collaboration between human rights defenders, scientists, and policymakers to ensure technology serves as a force for good rather than source of unchecked surveillance and fear. Now, our second speaker is Mr. Honung Javsehan, Commissioner of National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia and former APF deputy. So, floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to give an oversight on how Mongolian National Human Rights Commission works and what it has done in terms of human rights and digital technology. So I would like to briefly, first of all, introduce about the National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia, because in the region, our commission is quite unique, and its mandate is also very specific. And in this regard, well, the National Human Rights Commission Mongolia was established back in 2000, while the law on National Human Rights Commission was adopted in 2000. And the commissioners and the chief commissioner was appointed in 2001. So, which means that this year we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of its establishment. So the National Human Rights Commission is fully in compliance with the Paris principles, as it's got the accreditation for the consecutive fourth time, which means that well, the status is quite strong and is also in compliance with the Paris principles. However, the law on National Human Rights Commission was revised, and with this revision, the new mechanisms were established by the National Human Rights Commission, which is a national preventive mechanism against torture. And in 2021, the law on the legal status of human rights defenders was also adopted by the parliament. And with this, the National Protection Mechanism for Human Rights Defenders was officially established. And in fact, it is the only and the first human rights defenders protection mechanism which was established in the region. In the region is Asia Pacific region, I mean. And at the end of the 2021, law on the protection of personal data was also adopted. And with this, personal data protection mechanism also was established by the National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia. And in overall, we can see that we have now a general mandate commissioners and also specific mandate commissioners, which is for the national NPM, National Preventive Mechanism, and on the commissioner in charge of the Human Rights Defenders Protection, and also commissioner in charge of protection of personal data. So this is the mandate of the National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia. And with this and the overall, the functions of the National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia are as follows. Firstly is to develop multilateral cooperation with the government and civil society and media organizations and international organizations. And secondly, we are mandated to develop proposals with regard to improving the legislation connected with the fulfilling human rights and freedoms to the officials and also to the authorities that deal with the law initiating competence. Thirdly, we produce reports on the situation of human rights and freedoms in Mongolia every year, and we submit it to the State Great Khural, which is parliament. And the next function or mandate is to oversee the implementation of legislation regarding the gender equality. The next is to oversee the implementation of the law on the protection of personal data. The next is to oversee the implementation of governmental organizations and officials' duties, responsibilities to provide, protect, and respect human rights in accordance with the legal powers of the law and other relevant legislations. The protection of human rights and freedoms is also obviously one of the main mandates, and we do this mandate through receiving complaints and doing inquiries on certain human rights violations. The next is we propose and recommend on human rights and freedom related issues and deliver it to competent organizations and legal entities. Also, we do prepare proposals whether the draft laws or administrative decisions are in conformity with the Constitution of Mongolia, plus international instruments and human rights principles. The next one is we also develop proposals, submit proposals to ratify or accede the International Human Rights Instrument, and also send information to the United Nations Human Rights Council and treaty bodies. And also we do have a mandate on promoting and disseminating human rights education, which is also a very common and also a very important mandate. And we do research on emerging human rights issues, and also on thematic issues. And also we produce an expert opinion. So this is briefly about the National Human Rights Commission, the role, the mandate, and also the composition, and also different mechanisms that within the National Human Rights Commission. And with the theme or the topic of this event, I would like to give more detailed information with regard to two mechanisms, which is a Human Rights Defenders Protection Mechanism and also the Personal Data Protection Mechanism. Human Rights Defenders Protection Mechanism, so what it does, what mandates it has. So as I said, one commissioner is solely responsible or in charge of Human Rights Defenders Protection. and is mandated to receive complaints and information on violations of human rights defenders. And within these complaints, the mechanism collects facts and informations related to the complaint or information. And within that, after that, the mechanism identifies the needs for the protecting the human rights defender. Also, it does risk assessment. And our mechanism for human rights defenders protection is not only for individual human rights defender, but also it expands to the relatives of human rights defender, which is also a very strong mandate. Not only the defender, but also the relatives, the colleagues also can be protected within this mechanism. And human rights defenders mechanism delivers a conclusion related on the risk assessment, and based on the conclusion, the commissioner issues recommendations or directives. And beside these activities, the human rights defenders protection mechanism does analysis and research on the implementation of the law and the situation of human rights defenders. And it is all integrated into the annual report on the human rights and freedoms, which is submitted to the parliament, which means that the lawmakers, the decision makers will also hear about the issues, and based on the report, the parliament issues a resolution for the government to take necessary actions. And of course, the database maintenance is very important to also further do the assessment and improvement of the mechanism. As for the personal data protection mechanism, the mechanism handles information based on complaints, and also it is done by the initiative of the commissioner, which is also a broad mandate. Not only the complaint decides whether the complaint is investigated, but also the freedom of, or the power of the commissioner is very important. And beside this, the main mandate is to receive and oversee the breaches detected when the data handler is gathering or processing or utilizing data, and takes responsive measures against the negative impact, and also provides recommendations. And as for the commissioners, our legislation provides that the recommendation, once issued by the commissioner, is a compulsory or must to do or must to fulfill document for the receiving party, which means that the receiving authority, government organization, must fulfill the recommendation or directive. And in terms of the time frame for the recommendations, it's a 60 days, and for directives, it's a 30 days. So we have a time limit, and which also allows to have results within the short period of time. Well, the mandate also is to publicize law on the protection of personal data, which is also expands to the overall the protection of personal data, and in not only the government, for the government institutions, but also for the private entities. And of course, the oversight of the implementation of the law on the protection of personal data stays with the mechanism. And as for the works so far the personal data protection mechanism has done is a national inquiry on human rights and technology, which was started back in 2023, and then it continues. And now this year, the overall compilation of the reports will be issued, and also it will be included in the national report on human rights and freedom status, and will be submitted to the parliament. And within this inquiry, specifically, the mechanism has done analysis on the legal regulation and use of surveillance devices. And also it studied the current situation and plans regarding the use of surveillance cameras installed in public streets, roads, squares, and other public spaces for the purpose of ensuring public safety, road traffic safety, as well as the use of mobile cameras in law enforcement activities, and conducted the human rights risk management. Also, the mechanism has done examination of the operation of the databases of the General Police Agency, which includes the database of wounded persons and the database related to criminal records and sentencing. And with this regard, there's also a big debate whether to publicize or publicly disclose the pictures of the convicted of the crimes against minors. So now there's a working group was established and now working on whether it will be publicly disclosed or not. The assessment of the use of electronic monitoring devices, especially the electronic ankle bracelet, which is used in the law enforcement agency in order to restrict freedom of movement, was also done. And also monitoring of the use of social media platforms during the 2024 parliamentary elections of Mongolia was conducted. And within this national inquiry, the also development of proposals for legal regulations of artificial intelligence and its use was done. Also, assessment of the digital literacy among Mongolian citizens and the current state of the digital divide was carried out. Evaluation of the law on personal data protection, especially with regard to mechanisms for holding violators accountable, was done. Human rights assessment of e-Mongolia system and the digitalization of civil registration services, review on digitalization of the health sector and human rights risk, development of policy and legal regulatory proposals regarding social media platforms was also done. And at the moment now there's a big debate is going on with regard to social media platform usage. It is restricting the social platform usage for adolescents under 16 years old. And in 2025, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Privacy, Anna Brian Nagriris, also visited Mongolia on the request of the National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia to assess the protection of privacy and personal data. The key recommendations was to strengthen data protection governance. And within this, it was also recommended to establish an independent national data protection authority. Also, the strengthening enforcement mechanisms and penalties for violations was also one of the recommendations given within this, the data protection governance. And also, it is important to improve complaint mechanisms and access to remedies, as it is also limited, and it is not quite familiarized with the general public. The second recommendation was to improve digital governance and privacy safeguards, within which the privacy impact assessment for surveillance systems and digital platforms recommended to be conducted. And also it was noted that clear rules on data retention, access, and oversight for CCTV and biometric technologies should be introduced. Also, the third recommendation was to increase public awareness and digital literacy. And within that, it was recommended to launch a national campaign on privacy rights and data protection. And it was also recommended to improve digital literacy programs, particularly for rural areas and vulnerable population. The fourth recommendation was to regulate emerging technologies, and it is quite emerging because the artificial intelligence usage is now becoming more popular, and especially for the youngsters. And it was recommended to develop a human rights-based regulatory framework for artificial intelligence. And the transparency, explainability, and accountability in AI systems must be ensured. The fifth recommendation was to strengthen protection for vulnerable groups, as it is obvious that the vulnerable groups fall victims mostly, and it is important, and it was recommended to expand the safeguards for children in the digital environment. And also, it was recommended to improve reporting mechanisms for cyberbullying and online gender-based violence, and also to provide inclusive digital access for marginalized groups. So in overall, we can see that it is very important to have a strong political commitment for digital transformation and human rights. And within this, we must ensure that the technological innovations does not undermine privacy. The country must strengthen institutional oversight, enforcement mechanisms, and public awareness. And it is very essential to have a human rights-based approach to digital governance for balancing the innovation, security, and the protection of personal data. And at the moment, we can see that the number of cyberbullying and online harassment and discrimination is increasing, especially among youngsters. And currently, we have a very big debate on exposing the videos, the content which contain the violation, the bullying of the youngsters, and the dissemination of this content is now very strongly expanded. And the debates and also the different initiatives are now going on. And we can see that the digital transformation is affecting youngsters the most. And that's why it is now the time that government is now developing the regulation on regulating the social media platform usage for youngsters and for children under 16 years old. So this is briefly, and We'll be happy to have questions, and thank you, Bolor Seyhan.
Thank you, Commissioner Hona, and thank you for your introduction about the National Human Rights Commission and its mandates as a trailblazing practice regarding protection of human rights defenders as well as personal data protection. And now allow me to invite and introduce Ms. Orso Chonsun, Head of Center for Human Rights Development and former chairperson of Forum Asia. Floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. And I think that good morning and good afternoon, yeah? So this is a very big honor for me to make this small presentation. And I was actually asked to focus on two issues: the human rights in development, the strategic role and contribution of national human rights institutions, and technological influence, the impact of emerging technologies on the advancement of human rights. So before the first point, I really wanted to focus a little bit on the human rights in development and start from the right to development, because this right is a very complex procedural right consisting of access to information, participation in decision making, and access to justice. And to implement these rights, they should be legalized, implemented by state organizations with sufficient budgets. Their performance evaluations should be transparently reported and continuously improved based on these evaluations. And any interested CSOs, communities, and individuals should have easy access to these rights. The implementation status of these rights in Mongolia. So the implementation of these rights is not adequate and varies. The right to information is more or less legalized, but there is still challenges in terms of availability, accessibility, and usability of state information. And the right to participation is in the process of legalization as well. In fact, many laws include public participation in a separate provision, or at least in general principles. However, the implementation is not adequate, especially in drafting development policies, regulations, in development planning, national, local, or sector development planning, implementation, and performance evaluation. The current challenge is lack of consultations with all stakeholders. The implementation of the right to justice is getting even worse. The Supreme Court of Mongolia, for example, 4 years back issued an interpretation on the requirements for NGOs making the public interest litigation that the requirement goes beyond the NGO law and make it very difficult for civil society organizations to protect public interests in court. For example, out of 159 public interest litigation claims filed with the court since the interpretation was issued, 131 were rejected, 32 were dismissed, and only 12 claims were fully satisfied. As a result, I would say that there is a lack of ownership in development policy documents and plans, and no support and even demands from the people's side to implement them. So this is our big challenge, yeah? And also, what kind of what kind of challenges we have, so that the right to development now violated in terms of broad range of issues. This is land, water, resource use and management, etc. And also it affects different sectors: mining, natural environment, biodiversity protection, ecological balance, energy sector, social justice, etc. And also affected communities, of course, herders communities poor communities in cities, youth, women, elders, people with disabilities, etc. And rights violations for holders communities, for example, because of licenses for mineral exploration and extraction, the construction of a hydropower station without proper consultations with communities. The environmental impact assessment law is not implemented properly, and it has no clear provision on social impact assessment on the holders' livelihood and nomadic culture. And of course, the communities start protesting against mining, against energy projects, road construction, etc. So in this regard, the National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia has role to play and also contributes. The National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia was established in 2001 as an important core structure of the National Human Rights Mechanism. And last February, we also celebrated 25th anniversary of the National Human Rights Commission. And we CSOs have been very keen to support and collaborate with the Commission to strengthen its independence according to the Paris Principles. And our organization, the Center for Human Rights and Development, as a member of the Asian Forum for Human Rights, was privileged to become an implementing member of the ANI program and provided with the opportunity to produce 13 reports on the performance of the National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia on the implementation of the Paris Principles. And I believe that the process of these reports required continuous cooperation with the National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia and strengthened our trust in each other and the need for mutual support. And then the role and contribution of the National Human Rights Commission also was in protection of human rights defenders. Local holders become human rights defenders and make complaints directly or through the local representatives to the National Human Rights Commission, of the National Human Rights Commission. And human rights defenders also submit to the Human Rights Defenders Committee of the National Human Rights Commission and get protection according to the law about the legal status of human rights defenders. And the commissioner responsible for HRDs leads the issue and sends requirements or recommendations to relevant entities. And National Human Rights Commission's annual report on the status of human rights and freedoms to the Parliament of Mongolia includes a separate chapter on human rights defenders. And this report is discussed in the regular spring plenary session of the Parliament, and the Parliament resolution is to be issued for the implementation of the proposals and recommendations made in the report. And however, I also should say that there is a need to follow up actions to ensure that the resolution is implemented in a due manner. And then also the role and contribution of National Human Rights Commission is through collaboration with CSOs. The National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia has ex-officio civil society council in its structure according to its founding law. And in this council, the National Human Rights Forum, which is established in 2010, collaborates quite well. The forum has the membership, it's a membership coalition, and it has around 50 member NGOs working on different human rights issues. In many cases, National Human Rights Commission, whenever it's needed to consult with CSOs, it invites Human Rights Forum members for consultation. And Human Rights Forum also nominates its representatives in the CSO Council of the National Human Rights Commission. And also the civil society organizations themselves also understand the importance of collaboration with the National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia. So because, first of all Organizations, officials, or legal entities that receive the demands and recommendations of the commissioners shall have an obligation to comply with them. So this is important that the concerned issues were informed to the commissioners and get support from their side. And also, through inclusion of the concerned issues in the proposed recommendations for solutions in the annual report of the National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia to be submitted to the parliament and gets its resolution and follow-up action. So this is also very important. And this regard, I actually completed my first part of the presentation on the role and contribution of the National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia. And now my presentation starts on the second part, which is the impact of emerging technologies on the advancement of human rights. So I believe that the emerging technologies may offer powerful tools for the promotion of human rights, but at the same time, they may simultaneously create critical risk to privacy, equality, and freedom. But I also want to tell you honestly that since I have no professional experience with this issue, I used AI to prepare the second part of my PPT. So in AI gives me, like, for example, positive impacts. They bring like, it's helpful to access to essential services, for example, like healthcare, for example. AI now enable diagnostics, help identify diseases early, while telemedicine and drones is seen in Rwanda, for example, deliver medical supplies to remote areas, supporting the right to health. Education, for example, virtual learning environments and AI-powered personalized tools expand educational access to students in underserved regions or those with disabilities. And also in case of accountability and advocacy, satellite imaging data analytics in digital tools are used to document rights violations and hold perpetrators accountable. For example, organizations like Amnesty International use high-resolution satellite imagery combined with deep learning to verify war crimes and document human rights abuses in inaccessible conflict zones. Empowerment and expression. Connectivity, digital platforms allow marginalized voices to be amplified and activists to coordinate movements globally. In language translation, AI tools like Meta's No Language Left Behind facilitate communication across 200 plus languages, helping international organizations reach and empower diverse communities. AI assists in monitoring humanitarian situations, such as tracking displaced populations. Enhanced inclusion. Digital innovations can improve accessibility for people with disabilities, aligning with Sustainable Development Goals. AI-enabled diagnostics help identify diseases early, while I already told this one. And then the next, unfortunately, there is also challenges and risks. The rapid development of these tools often outpaces the regulatory frameworks, leading to significant human rights concerns. First of all, this is privacy and surveillance. Biometric databases in the Internet of Things, IoT, enable mass surveillance and data mining by governments and corporations, often without informed consent. Authoritarian regimes may use these tools to target dissidents and journalists. Bias and discrimination. Algorithms often inherit human biases from training data, leading to discriminatory outcomes in hiring, law enforcement, predictive policing, and healthcare. The digital divide. unequal access to technology can exacerbate existing social and economic inequalities, leaving those without connectivity further behind in accessing basic rights. Information integrity, AI-generated deep fakes, and bot-driven disinformation can manipulate public opinion, fuel social discord, and undermine democratic processes. So there are also emerging governance and safeguards to ensure technology remains human-centric. International bodies are developing new legal standards. Human-centric, in our words, probably human rights-based. Yeah. So that first is the EU AI Act, the first major comprehensive regulation. It classifies AI systems by risk level and bans unacceptable practices like social scoring. UN resolutions. The UN General Assembly recently adopted its first resolution on safe and trustworthy AI, emphasizing that the same rights people have offline must be protected online. And multi-stakeholder cooperation, experts advocate for human rights impact assessments to be integrated into every stage of a technology's life cycle. So on this, I complete my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mrs. Sorensuch. Within a short amount of time, you managed to cover national, regional, and global issues regarding development and technology. Now, allow me to welcome our last speaker, Ms. Wei Wei. She will introduce about the new trend and new initiative relating to the national human rights institutions and their performance. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. It's great to see so many of you joining online and hopefully some joining in person as well. So my name's Wei Wei, and it's a pleasure to join this conference today. So I'd like to start with a quick introduction about who we are and what organization I represent. Next slide, please. ANI. So I work with a network called ANI, and ANI stands for the Asian NGO Network on National Human Rights Institutions. We are the first and only network of our kind in the world. We bring together about 26 civil society organizations and HRDs from 18 countries across Asia, all dedicated to strengthening and establishing NHRIs in our region. And since 2006, Forum Asia has served as the secretariat of ANI. Next slide, please. Here is our membership list, and you may recognize some of our members. For example, Ms. Urna from CHRD Mongolia, our previous speaker. She is also one of our members of ANI. Next slide, please. So as a network, we work towards strengthening national human rights institutions in our region by encouraging compliance with the Paris Principles. So the Paris Principles are a set of international minimum standards for what makes an NHRI credible, transparent, and effective. In countries without NHRIs, we focus on advocating for the conditions necessary to establishing one, such as democratic norms and strong judicial mechanisms and a vibrant civic space. These conditions help ensure that when an NHRI is eventually established, it can thrive and operate effectively. Next slide, please. So what do we do at ANI? We monitor human rights and NHRI performances in countries where our members work in. And when we do observe any opportunities or concerns, we issue recommendations and reports to advocate for reforms or rights-based policies to strengthen NHRIs. As a network, we also provide capacity building and support to civil society organizations on engaging with NHRIs and the Paris Principles. Next slide, please. One of our flagship products is the ANI report on the performance and establishment of NHRIs in Asia, or we call it the ANI report. So my presentation today will half focus on our latest ANI report 2025, which assesses the performances of NHRIs across our region. And I will then use the second part of my presentation to link why these metrics that we use to assess NHRIs are important in advocating for NHRIs to work on the intersection between human rights, development, and tech. So the ANI report is produced every 2 years to assess the performance of NHRIs in line with the Paris Principles. It draws on research and civil society engagement from across Asia. You can download the ANI report on our Forum Asia website or use the QR code on the screen. And please feel free to share the report with your networks and reach out to us if you have any feedback. Next slide, please. In this edition of the ANI report, we have 13 country chapters. Each country chapter is analytically written by our respective members, drawing on their expertise, research, and on-the-ground experience. Next slide. Okay, thanks. On the methodology, we have 3 segments. Our members had to first complete the ANI Index survey by assigning scores to each question in the survey and providing detailed justifications for the scores that they have given. Throughout the process, engagements with a wide range of stakeholders, including NHRIs and other CSOs, are key for data collection and fact-checking. Finally, all this will contribute to the narrative report, which is the country chapters that you will read in the ANI report 2025. Next slide, please. On the ANI Index, it is a survey that we use, which contains 44 questions covering 5 main areas of the Paris Principles. Again, the Paris Principles is a set of international minimum standards for what makes an NHRI effective, credible, and independent. So the 5 main areas are independence, mandate, pluralism, promotion, and protection. So this ANI Index covering these 5 main areas ensures that our assessment of NHRIs is as comprehensive as possible and anchored by the Paris Principles. It is important to note that the ANI Index scores that you will see in the report must be read together with the narrative chapter because they're mutually complementary and supplementary. The narrative chapter provides the context, explanation, and case studies to justify and support the ANI Index scores. Next slide, please. Now to the more exciting part of the presentation, the results and key findings of the ANI report 2025. I hope you're able to see. I know it's a little bit tiny on the screen right now, but feel free to check out the QR code to refer to the report. So here we see the regional ranking for the overall performances of the NHRIs that we assessed. The ANI Index is not meant to promote competition, but rather it helps our members to comprehensively assess NHRIs using the Paris Principles. It also helps us identify which NHRIs have done well in which parent categories and what areas of improvements are still needed. Next slide, please. We also analyze the performances of NHRIs in each parent category. So here we see the ratings for independence. In this section, we looked at aspects like the selection processes for the leadership of the commission, financial autonomy, and the hiring recruitment practices of NHRIs. Across the region, we observed that the selection processes of commissioners are rarely ever fully transparent or participatory. In some cases, laws are in place to promote the inclusion of civil society in some countries, but poor implementation leads to selection processes that are ultimately still dominated by the executive. These closed and opaque processes have led to politicized appointments that erode public trust, as seen in cases like India, Bangladesh, and Korea. Concerningly, we see the use of financial control to pressure NHIs through ways like significant budget cuts or blackmails during parliamentary budget hearings. Some NHIs also lack functional independence as a result of a high number of government secondees or ex-civil servants in both the leadership and staff. A combination of these factors can lead to NHIs unable to withstand external pressures or protect their independence. Next slide, please. In the area of mandate, we look at elements like the coverage of an NHI's mandate, what rights do they cover, and what actors are within their jurisdiction. And more importantly, how these NHIs interpret and implement their mandates. We observe that the best performing NHIs have implemented the full breadth of their mandate to cover all areas of human rights. Even in cases of limitations, some NHIs have proactively adopted a broad interpretation of their mandates to ensure the full coverage of all human rights. In contrast, low-scoring NHIs have tended to avoid politically sensitive areas, such as civil and political rights, raising concerns about their effectiveness and independence. Across the region, all NHIs face a common problem: low uptake of NHI recommendations by governments. So this highlights a flaw that NHIs remain dependent on the political will of governments for the implementation of their recommendations. Next slide, please. In the area of pluralism, we look at components like how diverse an NHI's leadership and staff are, whether they have made sufficient efforts to engage with different communities. Most NHIs have made considerable efforts to improve their access to local communities, strengthen diversity, and connect with civil society. However, across the region, we see that nearly all NHIs are under-resourced and underfunded, leading to staff shortages and a growing backlog of cases. In terms of diversity and representation, many NHIs have taken steps to improve women representation. However, gaps remain in promoting the representation of ethnic and religious minorities, LGBTQIA+ community, and persons with disabilities. Next slide, please. Promotion is, as you can see, the best performing parent category, with most NHIs scoring highest in this area. In this category, we look at efforts by NHIs to promote human rights education and review legislation. We have seen proactive efforts by many to develop strategic partnerships with civil society, the education sector, governments to institutionalize human rights education. However, these efforts do not always translate into impact. Common feedback we hear are initiatives being too generic, leading to difficulties engaging with diverse stakeholders. In the area of legislative reviews, some NHIs have made significant efforts in reviewing laws to promote compliance with international norms. However, weaker NHIs continue to stay silent on controversial laws, raising concerns of eroding independence. Next slide, please. In protection, we look at key areas like an NHI's ability to effectively process complaints, carry out independent investigations, but also their capacity to provide protections and redress to victims and survivors of human rights violations. This category has the lowest average score by far, owing largely to the fact that NHRIs are mostly advisory in nature and are unable to enforce recommendations or directly administer extensive protection measures. It also especially highlights how shortcomings in other categories like independence, pluralism, promotion, mandate, how shortcomings in those categories can directly impact an NHRI's ability to deliver protection functions. For example, staff shortages. For example, staff shortages and inadequate regional presences have led to persistent delays in investigation and a growing backlog of cases, which in turn erode trust, public trust, and it's kind of like a spiral. In the lowest scoring NHRIs, eroding independence has resulted in NHRIs unwilling and unable to protect human rights defenders or conduct investigations independently, especially those that implicate government actors. Next slide, please. Okay. So now, why do these metrics that we just discussed in the annual report, why do they matter? These metrics derived from the Paris Principles. And as I've mentioned, they set the minimum standards for effective, credible, and independent NHRIs. So when NHRIs are unable to strengthen these aspects of their structure and implementation, it can undermine their ability to carry out its mandate. So its mandate of investigating human rights violations, advocating for legislative changes, and protecting human rights. So let's look at independence first. Independence is critical. A strong, qualified, and diverse commission is better able to withstand political pressure and speak out against violations. For example, in Sri Lanka, the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka recently, just in February, expressed concern over rising online threats to freedom of expression, particularly against journalists. It warned that laws like the Online Safety Act in Sri Lanka was being used to target journalists, while at the same time being inadequate to address emerging issues like phishing, hacking, and spyware. Across the region, we also see online harassment, doxing, cyber attacks that target human rights defenders. Where NHRIs are independent, they can respond quickly through investigations, public statements supporting defenders, and calls for legal reform. But where independence is lacking, the situation looks very different. For example, in Myanmar, the Myanmar National Human Rights Commission, which has now been internationally discredited, so the MNHRC has repeatedly failed to challenge the military junta, including its widespread internet shutdowns, surveillance, and online restrictions following the military coup in Myanmar in 2021. Another key factor is legal mandate. And NHRI's mandate must be broad enough to cover all human rights issues and extend oversight to actors like the military, police, and the private sector. This is important, especially when we look at cases like cyber attacks that are orchestrated by governments on alternative media and online red tagging of activists. These have happened in the Philippines and continue to happen. So it's important for the coverage of an NHRI's mandate to be able to extend to the military, to the police, but also when it should also extend to private companies, especially when human rights violations involve private tech companies. So, for example, in Malaysia, there have been a recent protest over AI data centers that are being built in one of our states called Johor. These AI data centers are causing concerns of a water crisis, and its development is causing many issues for local residents, such as the dust, poor air quality, poor water quality. So this case highlights how there is an intersection between tech development and environmental rights, showing why NHRIs must engage both governments and private companies to protect human rights. Next slide, please. Another important principle, as we've discussed, is pluralism. An NHRI that reflects and engages with diverse sectors is essential for building trust and credibility. For example, in the Philippines, the Commission on Human Rights, CHRP, conducted an extensive public inquiry into red tagging. So red tagging is when actors target human rights defenders or activists by falsely accusing them of being affiliated with the Communist Party. And this causes a lot of harm. For example, death threats, it leads to harassment. So it's a huge issue in the Philippines and in many other countries as well. CHRP held an extensive public inquiry into this issue. They held consultations with a wide range of stakeholders, including human rights defenders, journalists, law enforcement, academics, and so on, to better understand how different groups are affected by red tagging and who bears responsibility. In contrast, in India, the NHRC, National Human Rights Commission of India, has been criticized for limited engagement with civil society and human rights defenders. This has contributed to issues such as online and offline threats against HRDs not being addressed. India has also recorded the highest number of internet shutdowns globally for several years, particularly in sensitive regions like Jammu and Kashmir and Manipur. Yet the NHRCI has largely remained silent on these concerns. Promotion is another key area that we look at. NHRIs play an important role in conducting thematic studies on how technology and development impact human rights. Equally important is the follow-up, advocating for legislative reforms. For example, in Korea, the National Human Rights Commission of Korea has advocated for improving the accessibility of technology for persons with disabilities, demonstrating how laws and policies should not only protect rights, but also actively promote equal access for all groups in society. Next slide, please. Another key role is protection. Independent and timely investigations are essential for ensuring accountability. NHRIs also play a crucial role in supporting victims and protecting human rights defenders. For example, in Malaysia, recently in January, a journalist who spoke about racial discrimination, a very sensitive issue in Malaysia, when he spoke about this issue at a public forum, he faced backlash after a recording of his remarks circulated online. He was later arrested under the Sedition Act and the Communications and Multimedia Act. Suhakam, which is the Malaysian Human Rights Commission, criticized the arrest as disproportionate and a threat to freedom of expression. It reiterated the call to repeal the Sedition Act and reform the problematic provisions of the Communications and Multimedia Act. So cases like this show why it is important for NHRIs to speak out and stand up for human rights defenders, for activists, especially when, technology, such a new area, is involved. Next slide, please. Finally, there are many opportunities for NHRIs in Asia to engage on technology and development. One key area is regional cooperation to address transboundary issues. For example, human trafficking is a big issue in the region of Southeast Asia. There is human trafficking linked to online scam centers in Southeast Asia. Bodies like the ASEAN and CNF, which is the Southeast Asian National Human Rights Institution Forum, are working together. But these issues require strong coordination between countries and between different NHRIs, since the online space has no physical borders. Beyond scam centers and human trafficking, transnational repression is also a huge issue that affects not just the Asian region, but also in other parts of the world. They come in the form of, for example, red tagging, doxing, surveillance, and cyber attacks against human rights defenders, human rights organizations. This transnational repression is used to silence critiques across borders. NHRIs play a critical role in reviewing legislation to ensure laws are rights-based and that they're able to speak up against these terrible acts against human rights defenders. Finally, NHRIs are crucial in studying business and human rights, including the impact of generative AI and deepfake technologies, as well as labor protections for gig economy workers on online platforms like Grab or Uber. These emerging areas highlight the expanding role of NHRIs in ensuring technology and development advance human rights instead of undermining them. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. Now we have 20 minutes for question and answer session. So we will now open the floor to the audience. Please keep your questions concise and directed to specific panelists if possible, so we can maximize our remaining time on these vital issues. So based on questions from the audience, allow me to invite Mr. Honang regarding the first question designated for you. So this question is, what are the specific forms of protective measures that are available for human rights defenders within Mongolia's human rights defenders protection mechanism?
Well, thank you for the question. And as we mentioned earlier, that this is first of its kind. And so the structure, how it works, we have a Human Rights Defenders Committee, and which is under the commissioner in charge for protection of human rights defenders. And the 6 members of the committee are elected and selected and appointed. So 2 members are appointed, one from the Mongolian Bar Association and one from the Advocates Association of Mongolia. So those are professional lawyers, and those are nominated by these 2 organizations. And 4 other members are elected through open advertisement, and the representatives of NGOs, non-profit organizations, civil society organizations who are specialized in human rights are open to submit the documents. And the working group in charge of selecting or electing the committee members, they do the review of the documents, and through the public hearing, the candidates, the nominees are elected, and which means that not the government organization or that the government is playing a role, but the civil society organizations are selected to this committee, and this is the very important structure that does the risk assessment. And based on the risk assessment conclusion, the commissioner issues a resolution or takes necessary actions. And how they're protected, the protection is provided in accordance with the law on protection of the victim and witnesses. and which means that the personal protection can be provided, or other measures, like, for example, based on the risk assessment, we request police to accompany the human rights defender to whatever places he or she goes. So this was one of the cases we have done it earlier, 2 years ago, and the human rights defender meant to another province, and in that province there was a high risk for assaulting the human rights defender, and therefore we issued a recommendation to provide protection for the human rights defender during her trip to the countryside. But there's an issue with the protection of human rights defenders within the victim and witness protection institution, because this institution is under the police department, which is also a very high risk, and the requirement for that institution is that they cut off all the communication means, which means that the telephones, the internet usage will be restricted over there. So that was also one of the cases, and this is also one of the reasons most the human rights defenders who need protection wouldn't like to have the institutional protection, the personal protection within the police department.
Thank you, Commissioner Honan. As a matter of time, allow me to read you the next question designated for you. So, what measures could strengthen the influence of human rights institutions in ensuring that parliaments and governments act upon their recommendations?
Well, as I said, that our commission has a very unique mandate, and also the updated, revised law on National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia has a provision that says the national report, which is submitted to the parliament, must be heard at the standing committee, at the legal standing committee, and also at the regular session of the parliament. And after the discussion of our report, the parliament issues a resolution. So this is provided within the legislation, revised law on National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia, and which ends that parliament issues a resolution for the government to take necessary actions. But the thing is that not all the recommendations are included in the parliament resolution. And in that case, if the recommendation is not included in the resolution, the commissioner issues a recommendation, because we have like two kind of documents. So one is within the report, and the other one is by the commissioner individually. Commissioner issues a recommendation that would include and contain leftover recommendations of the report submitted to the parliament. So this is all in the legislation, which is must follow provision, and by this I want to say that it is important to have in the legislation the provision that allows that the parliament, after hearing our report, issues a resolution, and it says that during on the implementation of the resolution, the government must hold accountable on the next parliament sessions legal standing committee meeting. So is it clear?
Thank you, Mr. Honan. And there are several questions on this way. So based on the question and answer box, would you mind to glance it and answer based on any experience? So question is, in the graphs shown in your presentation, Philippines ranks highest on most graphs and India ranks lowest on all graphs. If you had to identify one characteristic in how each of these NHRIs function, what would it be? And next one is tech companies are playing growing role in global conflicts and are sometimes aligned with the state actors. How can NHRIs and the broader human rights community hold tech companies accountable and ensure they respect international norms, such as Paris principles? And to all speakers, it is great to know that civil society and SO NHRIs are collaborating on some transnational issues on tech and human rights. Do you see in Asia any government cooperation, for instance, on law reform, regional treaties, or similar to deal with human rights and tech issues? And next question to all speakers. Technology can be adjusted based on humans, including language bias, such as developers and parameter setters, but how can we ensure the shareability and the coordination of that part? So you have 10 minutes to respond.
Sorry, is it possible for you to send the question to me in the
Okay. So from the start, please, would you mind to start with the questions that I read to you?
Sorry, can you just repeat them to me because I did not quite catch them. If they are
Yeah, so according to your graphs shown in your presentation, Philippines ranks highest on most graphs and India ranks lowest on all graphs. If you had to identify one characteristics in how each of these NHRIs function, what it would be?
okay, if I caught it correctly, okay, let me just read that back. So yes, Philippines, CHR Philippines is one of the best performing NHRIs that we have assessed last year, owing to, the fact that CHRP has put in a lot of effort in defending its independence and showcasing that in the form of conducting very thorough and extensive investigations, even on the toughest of topics. So, for example, some of you may recall the war on drugs in the Philippines. It was particularly horrible under the previous administration, the Duterte administration. And during that time, civic space was very, very, very shrunken. And the CHR Philippines stood by the human rights defenders. They conducted independent investigations into a lot of the unlawful killings and the suspicious deaths. And in doing so, they, of course, angered the government. And the retaliations that they received included forms of blackmail during parliamentary hearings. At one point, the Senate refused to give them any budget and was threatening to give them 1 peso budget, like 100 peso or something like that, which is ridiculously small amount. Yet they stood by their investigations. They continued standing up for human rights defenders. And it really showed that a strong commission is one that can withstand and withstand pressure, political pressure, even in the toughest of situation. So those are some of, and even in recent years, red tagging is a huge issue in the Philippines. As you can see, CHRP did not shy away from this horrible topic. They conducted an extensive public inquiry into the issue and was steadfast in conducting interviews, consultations across the country. So these are some of the characteristics, independently conducting investigations, standing up for human rights defenders, protecting human rights defenders, and continually advocating for change, for accountability, are characteristics that make an NHRI strong. And then let me just check. Second question.
The second question is about the tech companies are playing growing role in global conflicts, and some of them are already befriending the state actors, and how can NHRIs and the human rights community can demand accountability?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So indeed, tech companies have increasingly played a bigger role in conflicts worldwide. For example, in this Middle East conflict going on right now, I just read a news a few days ago of this satellite imaging company called I've forgotten what it's called, but something labs. Um, and this satellite imaging company, they provide satellite images in almost real time for those who, subscribe to it. And some of its clients include governments and also NGOs and journalists because they use these satellite images to do fact checking, to check, where they would supply their aid to, provide support and resources to. So, the company has recently announced that it would have at least a 4-day delay in providing satellite images for the Iran war that's ongoing. And the reason for this is because it wants to prevent non-American and non-Israeli actors from taking advantage of these satellite images to use against the US and Israel in this conflict, this ongoing conflict. So the problem is that it affects NGOs and journalists' ability to fact check, to coordinate aid and resources, and sending support and help to these, attack sites and so on. So in this case, there is a huge concern, like what is the role and responsibility and what are the boundaries for tech companies during war times? And in terms of what an NHRI can do, they're supposed to advocate for legislative changes or at least speak up for victims. Of course, in the US, there isn't an NHRI, but there have been many precedents of NHRIs in other countries stepping up and calling for their own governments to intervene, to speak up, to ask for accountability. So, for example, in Myanmar, a lot of the NHRIs in Southeast Asia, like the Malaysian one, the Timor-Leste one, and the Philippines one, they have continuously advocated to our own governments to disengage from the military junta in Myanmar and to advocate for accountability for victims. So in these cases, NHRIs across the world also have maybe a role to ask our governments what are the boundaries for tech companies during war times, and what are the responsibilities of private companies. So yes, I hope this answers your question. So I'll stop.
And last question for Ms. Wei and the participant attendee asked, last month the Singapore government announced that they are training AI to predict public opinion to assist them with policy design. Is this an emerging trend in Asia states, and what challenges do you foresee when governments do that? So in addition to that, in Mongolian parliament, they already announced that in law making and law reforming process, they will also use AI to predict the correlation and necessity of the new tabled revision or new drafts. So
Of course, the use of AI is growing and it's unstoppable. And in many cases, AI has helped us a lot in our lives, even our daily lives. So it's, of course, expected that governments would also use AI to assist in, policy making and predicting trends. But if such use is affecting rights like freedom of expression, then it is problematic. But if it is being used towards good things, for example, predicting how, public health services might be used or people's reaction to a new public health campaign, then that sort of thing might be good. But if it's being used to predict or like manipulate election outcomes, then that's clearly a violation of human rights. Then in that case, that would be very, very problematic. So it really depends on what area, what the aim is, and what the expected outcome of using AI in policy making. So thank you.
So, thank you. And is there any contribution from? Oh, there's one question from the audience. Going to step up.
Hello, good morning from Colchester. I'm Carla. I'm an LLM student here, LLM in Human Rights Law student here at the University of Essex. And my question is addressed to Ms. Wei. Foremost, as someone who's working at the Commission on Human Rights in the Philippines, it's great to see that we rank like high in terms of like the other metrics. But so my question is more on the so given the absence of a regional human rights system in Asia, unlike in other regions like the European and the inter-American systems, how have the national human rights institutions in Asia filled in that gap and addressed the human rights issues in the region, or I mean in the Asian region?
And allow me to use my moderator's capacity to ask this question for all speakers as a last question. Would you mind to step in and share your position regarding this question?
I'm happy to take this question first. Thank you so much for the question, and it's always lovely to hear from someone from CHRP. So indeed, CNF, which is the Southeast Asian National Human Rights Institution Forum, is a very important forum with lots of potential for coordination across the region to respond to like transborder issues such as climate change. I remember in 2023, CHRP produced a study, a paper on climate change and human rights, and it is the first NHRI in the world to conduct such a comprehensive study on climate change and human rights. So it really shows that when NHRIs coordinate together, they have even more potential to not just look at the climate change issue in the Philippines, but if they coordinate together, they can look at regional issues. For example, how the forest fires in Indonesia, how it affects not just Indonesians, but also neighboring countries like Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. And then the second thing is something I mentioned, which is the human trafficking issue that's linked to scam centers. That's a huge problem in parts of in places like Myanmar, Cambodia. So human trafficking isn't just something that affects those countries, but it also affects people from Philippines, Indonesia, even beyond the Southeast Asian region. So it's important for NHRIs in CNF to work together on identifying maybe the common routes and of human trafficking and what are the rights that are being violated, who the perpetrators are, and more importantly, what are the responsibilities of these governments and legislative reforms that are needed, not just isolated in one country, but across the region. And of course, using Southeast Asia as an example, CNF does work closely with ASEAN, which is the intergovernment body in this region of the world. And it's important that NHRIs work together with our governments across the region to tackle these issues. Thank you.
Commissioner Honor. Commissioner Honor, do you have some insights to contribute?
Yes, okay, thank you. Well, because we don't have the regional human rights body, right? But however, the Asia Pacific Forum for Human Rights Institutions, well, we do gather once a year. We do have a annual meeting, and all the members were gathered together, and there is a one possibility or platform or forum where we can discuss the common issues. And like, for example, we did in 2023 when we gathered in India, New Delhi. So we have adopted a Delhi Declaration, and it was the 28th annual general meeting of the Asia Pacific Forum of National Human Rights Institutions. And there we addressed the human rights issues like bolstering the human rights ecosystem, reinvigorating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and also we touched the climate change and human rights issues. So this is the way we jointly pay attention to certain issues, to address certain human rights issues. But however, it is just a declaration, so there is no enforcement. But like in other regions, like the European Human Rights Court, so it is also an issue, a debate, and also a gap that there is no such regional human rights official body that decides on specific human rights issues and the decision is enforced. But I do I do believe that the promotion of the regional such body is very important, and if there is a opportunity, and I think we should all encourage this kind of initiative, and the regional human rights issues can be solved, and I think the human rights emerging issues at the regional level can be more addressed if there isn't such body.
Thank you, Commissioner Hanang and President Orange. Do you mind to share your thoughts?
Yeah, you know, I'm also not very much familiar with the cooperation of national human rights institutions in our region, in Asia Pacific. And I think that every country in our region actually is committed to implement the SDGs. The SDGs are themselves are very much human rights based. So I would really appreciate if the national human rights institutions in the Asia Pacific would also do something, you know, in a coordinated, in a cooperated, in collaborated way to strengthen the country's commitments, you know, towards implementation of the SDGs. And I think that there is already was a Merida principles or Merida declaration for national human rights institutions, you know, to support the implementation of the SDGs. So I think that I would really much, you know, appreciate this kind of cooperation and collaboration between national human rights institutions in the Asia Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you. Today's discussion has underscored that while technology is rapidly reshaping our world, our fundamental human rights framework remains an indispensable compass. We have seen through Alison Kilpatrick's insights that the rule of law is fragile and must be defended against the faults of its security requires the sacrifice of rights. Commissioner Honan's experience in Mongolia reminds us that the legislative action, particularly regarding the marginalized groups, including child protection in the digital sphere, requires constant vigilance to ensure it empowers rather than restricts. Furthermore, as highlighted by President Onsoj and Ms. Weiwei, the independence and effectiveness of NHRIs are under threat from the shrinking democratic space and budgetary pressures. It is clear that we cannot manage this challenge in isolation. We must foster a spirit of regional and global collaboration between human rights defenders, technologists, academia, and civil society. As we live today, let us remember that just because technology can be developed doesn't mean it should be deployed without a deep ethical consideration. Our goal is to ensure that the digital future is one where rights are not just protected, but are the very foundation upon which innovation is built. Thank you to our esteemed panelists and all of you for your engagement in this vital conversation. And we will break for 20 minutes, and our next session will start after 20 minutes. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. We will be starting our fourth panel for the Human Rights in Asia conference. My name is Carla, and I'm a LLM Human Rights Law student here at the University of Essex. And I wish to welcome everyone to the fourth and final panel of the 18th Human Rights in Asia conference. We thank our participants who have joined us here in person at Colchester and online. And before we start, we wish to remind everyone that this conference is recorded. Kindly communicate using respectful language. And for your questions, please use the chat and we will address them during the Q&A session that will follow after our speaker's presentation. This session will focus on the critical human rights landscape in Asia concerning issues of surveillance and censorship. The weaponization of technology to surveil and censor on a mass level has placed a plethora of human rights under threat. Although cyber regulation has legitimate basis that can help ensure human rights observance, such as combating hate speech and preventing disinformation, overly restrictive and indiscriminately broad measures can be detrimental, particularly to the observance of the right to freedom of expression. Insufficient action regarding online abuse and harassment further puts human rights defenders under threat, particularly those from already marginalized communities. Our final panel for today will explore the growing weaponization of digital tools by state actors, the criminalization of online dissent and internet shutdowns, and how these affect the individual's right to freedom of expression. We will also discuss the experiences of critical journalists and media workers who are at the receiving end of state repression. For this session, we are privileged to have with us three distinguished experts on digital surveillance, censorship, media regulation, and transformative constitutionalism. Our first speaker is Nick Williams. Nick is the Policy and Campaigns Officer at Index on Censorship and a freedom of expression advocate based in Glasgow. He has expertise in SLAPs, online free expression, digital rights, and transnational repression. He's the co-chair of the UK Anti-SLAP Coalition and a steering group member of the Tackling Transnational Repression in the UK Working Group. At the European Centre for Press and Media Freedom, he coordinated the inaugural year of the Media Freedom Rapid Response, which responds to violations of media freedom in Europe. Previously, Nick led Scottish PEN's campaigning and advocacy, focusing on anti-SLAP, free expression, digital rights, and surveillance policy. Our second speaker for this afternoon is Professor Shilpi Roy Chaudhry. Professor Chaudhry is a professor of law at Christ University, India. She specializes in gender, personal laws, and public international law. In 2016, she founded the Gender Studies Committee at the School of Law. She has conducted gender sensitization programs in corporate and educational institutions and has presented at seminars, conferences, and panel discussions on topics including criminal law, gender, LGBTQ rights, and children's rights. Her work includes research on intersectional feminism and transformative constitutionalism. At the School of Law at Christ University, India, she encourages students to adopt a critical, gendered lens when analyzing domestic and international law. She continues to inspire the next generation of legal professionals. And finally, our last speaker for this panel is Professor Danilo Arau. Professor Arau is a journalist and educator in the Philippines. He's a professor of journalism at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, associate editor of Bulatlat, and a columnist of Pinoy Weekly. He has a Doctor of Philosophy degree from Technische Universität Ilmenau, and his dissertation focuses on journalism and culture of impunity in the Philippines. Once again, those are our distinguished experts, and I will now turn over the mic to our first speaker, Nick Williams. Nick, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Carla, and lovely to see everyone, and thank you for the invitation. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of Index's work in India. We've been working on that policy space for a few years now. I think one of the key aspects of India is that it is one of the most challenging free expression spaces in the world, especially when we think about democratic states, but also it's a country of influence both within the region and further afield. So what happens there has a lot of trickle-on effects to other countries neighboring, but also beyond that as well. I think I'm going to skip the first panel of the first slide, just a bit of background about Index, but we focus on reporting on and protecting freedom of expression across the globe. So I've looked at cases in Iran, Russia, China, across Europe, Latin America, increasingly the US, but also further afield, and a wide range. We are a freedom of expression organization, so we look at media freedom, digital rights, artistic rights, and academic freedom, not just for journalists, but for everyone, protesters, bloggers, academics, artists, poets, etc., etc. So I'm just going to give a few top line sort of summaries and then go into some of the more granular aspects of India, because I think India is a really fascinating country. Some countries you see there's maybe a certain tactic of choice. So, for example, in Hungary, whenever we go to Hungary, the Hungarian government will talk to us at length about how there are no journalists in prison and no journalists have been killed in the recent years, and that is not wrong. Hungary does not generally arrest journalists, but that's because they've developed a whole other form of repression using the capture of institutions, the throttling of economic support for independent journalists, the use of legal threats and things like that. India, we see, however, an incredibly diverse ecosystem of threats aimed at journalists, activists, campaigners, and increasingly members of marginalized groups or minority groups who choose to speak out, whether online and off. So we see, for example, physical attacks and killings, surveillance, online harassment and smear campaigns, legal threats such as slaps, prior restraint censorship through sort of film certification, hosting of events, things like that, and abuse of what are called FIRs or first incident reports to allow for journalists and other campaigners to be held on pretrial detention for a really substantial amount of time. So if we go to the next panel, please, I just wanted to give some top line stats. This is from a very, very important report by the Free Speech Collective looking at their capturing of alerts from 2025. And so they captured about nearly 15,000 instances of violations in 2025, including 9 killings, 8 journalists, 1 social media influencer, 117 arrests, including 8 journalists, 40 attacks that have been carried out by alleged state-backed groups, local police, government officials. Again, 33 of those were journalists. And there is a real issue with local and rural reporting, where there is there's not a big ecosystem of support. There's not a lot of media scrutiny. So we're seeing a lot of these cases. So things like liquor smuggling, gun running, local corruption stories, things like that. 11,000 instances of censorship. I'll go into a bit more detail later on into the ecosystem set up to control online speech. 208 episodes of lawfare aimed at reporters, social media commentators, and podcasts. And restrictions, again, this is not just a media freedom issue. So we see academic reporting, academic conferences, film festivals, cultural movements being denied permission for screenings, events, things like this. So And a lot of this is framed around this idea of the national identity or anti-national, and this has increasingly been seen within a religious lens with Modi's regime, where, for example, Christians and Muslims are seen to be anti-Indian because there is a narrative that's been constructed as for India being a Hindu nation, and these other people who are realizing their rights don't have the same access to that narrative as you would see with the majoritarian viewpoint. So yeah, so that's just some of the background. I'm just going to go into a few examples just to sort of show what we're thinking about in terms of the online space. So India has really perfected internet shutdowns. It has led the world in internet shutdowns for a number of years. I mean, for 6 years until 2023, it was the world leading place of internet shutdowns. So we go to the next slide, please. So in 2023, for example, it was responsible for 116 shutdowns. That was the highest number of shutdowns anywhere in the world. Last year, they were second to Myanmar with 84, but that is still the largest number for a democratic state in the world. So even though doesn't have as many, that's not really a cause for celebration. These happen on national level, but also increasingly at state levels. And so there you can see how it breaks down, with Manipur being the state with the highest number of internet shutdowns. You also have some relatively absurd justifications for shutdowns. You see some of the standard ones: elections, conflict, protests. There's also an increasing use of internet shutdowns to prevent cheating in school and government placement exams, which I've always found to be quite a remarkable abuse of what is such a powerful technology, because this is not just shutting down the internet access for a few individuals' targets. This can be everyone in a certain area or a certain piece of technology. So it is a real sweeping power, and you can see there's been a lot of analysis looking at this. So shutdowns in 2023, cost the country allegedly at $1.9 billion. And $118 million in foreign investment in just the first half of 2023 alone. And because India is an incredibly online country, they've done a lot to really develop an online infrastructure. I mean, when you travel there, you can pay for everything on your phone using online payment platforms, and not just in the bigger cities. And so when you can't access the internet, it has real considerable economic impacts as well. And also it will target a lot of people who are not necessarily the people that they're aiming to target. And then we can talk a little bit about surveillance as well. So the next panel, the next slide, please, is India is not immune from the global reckoning we've been having with NSO Group and Pegasus. So in 2019, when WhatsApp had realized that NSO had exploited WhatsApp, they had found that at least 121 Indians had been targeted, including a number of activists who were later imprisoned. Over 2,000 Indian numbers were in a document leaked from Pegasus, and there's been about 10 numbers that were actually infected. We may never know the full number because it requires the people on the list to go and get quite intensive digital forensic processes. But we also know journalists, campaigners, activists, even opposition MPs and politicians were targeted. Two big cases is one against Siddharth Varadarajan, the founding editor of The Wire. I'm just going to mention that name because it's relevant for later on. But we're seeing there was a real concerted use of this to target people who had been critical and continue to be critical of the government, or are publishing public interest journalism that's being perceived to be critical of the government. If you go to the next slide, please. The Indian government had been incredibly dismissive of the Pegasus project, which is a consortium of organizations that look to scrutinize leaked documents from Pegasus. They called it a fishing expedition based on exaggerations, conjecture to malign Indian democracy and its institutions. You see this as a common thread through all of the government's responses to these sort of issues. They see everything as a reputational risk. And as a result, that really undermines the ability for reprieve, for reforms to improve it, and for remedy for the targets. And also we can see how the state responded to the Pegasus scandal by what happened when the Supreme Court started to try to look at it. So the devices of Varadarajan, the founding editor of The Wire, was analysed by the technical committee established by the Supreme Court. They published a report in 2022 or 3, I can't remember exactly the year. The report's never been made public, but the court did, however, note that the Indian authorities did not cooperate with the investigation. It's important to state that Pegasus NSO Group only sells to state institutions, so there are significant questions for the Indian government to answer, considering the number of people who could have been hacked by Pegasus. This is not an old story, even though I reported that the report was published about 3 or 4 years ago. Last year, alleged victims went to court to demand the opening of the sealed report. We still don't know what is actually in that report. And I think this quote from Dinesh Dwivedi is really important, is that if they have used it before, there is nothing preventing them from using it today. And with no accountability, no commitment to work on the recommendations, no acknowledgement of the use of the technology, there's nothing stopping it being used again, or another technology. And we're seeing in Europe, it may not be NSO Group or Pegasus, but it will be other technologies like Predator and other things. So this is why a framework is vital to ensure these technologies are not abused to target protected speech. I can get to the next slide, please. I wanted to give a bit of a snapshot of one of the most concerning cases, and also its overlap with surveillance, because we can't separate surveillance from these broader rights infringements. So there's a very influential case that's still going on in India, the Bhima Koregaon 16 or BK16, which is basically in 2018, violence broke out at a celebration to commemorate the Battle of Bhima Koregaon, which was basically what happened was a sort of Dalit British army defeated the Peshwa army. It's become this sort of moment of Dalit solidarity. It's been this sort of idea of sort of being proud of that, and it's an annual occasion. The day before that, there had been a conference looking at Dalit empowerment, equality, activation, which a number of leading activists were involved in. But a few months after the commemoration, a large number of activists, academics, lawyers, translators were arrested. Yes, The Incarcerations by Alpa Shah is an incredibly good book, which I definitely recommend people reading it. So 16 activists, poets, and researchers have been arrested and detained. A lot of them remain in detention right now. They've been targeted under UAPA, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. 7 continue to be in detention. They've never been found guilty. Stan Swamy, unfortunately, died while in prison from COVID in 2021. And he is a remarkably profound expert. And I recommend people find his writings, because it is an incredible person. So this is a really significant violation of fundamental freedoms for a wide range of protected groups. But if you go to the next panel, we can also see the online harassment aspect and the online surveillance aspect. Yes, so sorry, could we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So a key part of the evidence that had been used to justify the arrest and ongoing detention of the BK16 were documents found on the computers of Rona Wilson by Pune police during the 2018 raid. I will say that there was no search warrant. The courts had denied the search warrant, but that didn't stop the police raiding and detaining and seizing devices. The police alleged to have found documents about meetings between some of the people who've been arrested and Maoist militants, money received by the Communist Party of India, as well as a letter detailing a plot to assassinate Modi. This is part of this phrase of urban Naxalites. Naxalites are a group of Maoist sort of militants who have tried to be relatively independent from the Indian state. It's a far bigger story, a far bigger issue that there are far more smarter people than me to talk about. But they've become a bugbear for the Indian state, and a lot of people have been called an urban Naxalite to denigrate their work. There was and you see it with like when Gary Lankesh was killed, that name was thrown thrown out about her as well. So clones of these seized hard drives were given to an American digital forensics company who sort of scrutinized it, and they basically found that both the computers of Rona Wilson and Sundara Gadling devices had been compromised for nearly 2 years. And the company found that the primary goal of the attacker was surveillance and incriminating document delivery, suggesting that these incriminating documents that the state have used as a basis for the BK16 were actually placed on there by people unknown. Arsenal also connected the same attacker to a significant malware infrastructure that had been deployed over 4 years to attack other co-defendants in the BK16 case and other defendants in other Indian cases. It was carried out through Netwire, which is a commercially available malware. I'll also point out that one of the lawyers in the BK16, not one of the lawyers who were in prison, but one of the lawyers for the BK16, it has also been found that he was also targeted with Pegasus as well. So there is an incredibly elaborate abuse and use of either commercially available spyware, and then unlawful police raids to construct this picture to justify the ongoing detention of journalists, poets, academics. So this is a significant case, and I really recommend reading it because I think it's a really important microcosm for the threats to free expression that we see in India. And I think this is something that we can never move away from. India is presenting itself as, an ally for Western countries, for European, for the US, for North American, for others, especially as a bulwark against China. As China being the most influential actor in Asia, India is seen to be the democratic stronghold in Southeast Asia. But we're seeing here a framework of unaccountable rights repression. And if you can go to the next slide, we can also look at this in terms of how it looks at online speech. So the internet use in India has exploded. According to MeitY, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, in 2000, 5.5 million Indians were online. Recent data, I think this data is from 2024, put that number at 850 million. So it is really, really exploded. As well as mobile use, it's not just devices, a lot of it is mobile internet access. And as a result, it has changed a lot of Indian society. As I mentioned, payments and things like that has really taken hold online, as well as online media. And there is a lot of online media that is not pro-government. Pro-government organizations have done very well at consolidating control over traditional media outlets. Online, predominantly through YouTube and Facebook and other platforms, has been a place where independent journalists have found a place to publish free from corporate control. Ravish Kumar is one of the most obvious examples, who was one of India's leading broadcasters at NDTV before leaving due to its purchase by a Modi-friendly oligarch, and he's incredibly influential on YouTube. But this has not been a smooth process. India has taken to exerting a lot of pressure on platforms. So Washington Post have done some very good reporting on Indian online repression and censorship, and so they reported that based on reports published by the Indian Parliament, that takedown requests for posts and accounts increased from 407 to 6,775 between 2014 and 2022. And on Twitter, the number exploded from 224 in 2018 to 3,417 in 2022. And even more recently, we've seen over 300 requests for online content to be removed between October 2024 and September 2025. So this has been an incredibly proactive and muscular attempt by the Indian state to take down content. And we saw this especially after the Pahalgam attacks, where we saw the wire being blocked, we saw individual posts being taken down, perceived to be anti-India or pro-Pakistan, predominantly targeting Muslims. And we also see online restriction on a lot of connected issues. Cricket, For example, there's if people seem to be celebrating, if Pakistan beats India in cricket, if some people are perceived to be celebrating a bit too much, we have seen laws being targeting them as well. So, I mean, there is a certain absurdity, unfortunately, in how some of these laws are deployed. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is a slide that the Indian government put together for a consultation on the Digital India Bill, which never actually made it. It was announced by a previous minister at MeitY, but after he lost his election, it sort of faded away. But I think it gives a good picture into how the government perceives the internet at the moment. So in 2000, you see in the left column very glowing terms about the internet. You know, it talks about a space for good, allowing citizens to interact. It talks about it as a source of information and news. Internet today, and again, this is about 2 years old or 2 or 3 years old, you have the space for good has been replaced with a space for criminality and illegalities. A source for information and news has changed to proliferation of hate speech, disinformation, and fake news. And this sort of really, for me, perfectly encapsulates the Indian mindset, the estate mindset towards what the internet is. It's no longer this connection tool. Frankly, it's a tool that they can't control. And so I think there's a lot of perception shaping as to what they believe it is to justify the groundwork for regulating and disproportionately regulating online space to target critical speech. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So I'm just going to run through some of the laws that have been proposed or have been enforced, because I think it does give an interesting picture as to the legal tools. Because a lot of what I talked about earlier, I would think about in terms of blunt instruments, you know, surveillance, arrest, detention, killings, tax. But the Indian state has become incredibly adept at transforming regulation and legislation to consolidate state control over online speech. So, for example, the Telecoms Act, which was looking to modernize law. And this is, again, a very central tactic of the Indian state, is a lot of Indian law is based on colonial era laws from the British state. And so they're understandably wanting to modernize and develop their own domestic law. That's totally legitimate. And I will say, as a Anglo-Indian based in the UK, the British did not have the Indian people's best interests when they were legislating. However, this modernization, this nationalization, for the lack of a better word, is not really trying to address the flaws of the colonial law. It's about replacing where the power sits, and they want the power to sit with the Indian state. So, for example, the Telecoms Act, it allows states to exert control or take temporary possession over telecommunication services at times of public emergency or in the name of national security or friendly relations with foreign states. National security is a term that is incredibly elastic, as we're seeing right now with the US's and Israel's action in Iran. And so is public emergency. What does that mean? Does that mean if we had another pandemic, they would be able to totally transform the online space? It allows government to intercept communications and undermine end-to-end encryption to ensure information can be disclosed in an intelligible format. That's impossible with end-to-end encryption because they cannot decrypt it without the platforms and without the technology to do so. And obviously we know activists, journalists, survivors, victims of crime require end-to-end encryption to be able to communicate securely. So this is just one of these laws that have been brought forward that could end up wresting control over the architecture that underpins India's digital economy. Next slide, please. The Unlawful Activities Prevention Act is a vast piece of legislation. I won't have enough time to give it justice here, but it's a perfect microcosm of offline moved online with very little awareness of what damage that can do. It does damage offline as well, I would say. This law is an incredibly sweeping law. It's basically an anti-terror law that prevents certain activities based on individual associations. It allows for expansive search and seizure powers. And in 2019, it was reformed to allow individuals to be named as terrorists as well as organizations. And you have a lot of people spending years in pretrial detention. So people who have never been in front of a judge, never been able to mount a defense. There's been some very, very good research, but I think it's Article 14, that have looked at UAPA. And it says of the 8,371 people arrested between 2015 and 2020, 97% of those arrested were ultimately acquitted. That is not a system that is working. You should not have such a high number of acquittals for a law if it is a robust law where the evidence has been scrutinized and where there's been a following of the rule of law standards. And again, it's been used against journalists, academics, campaigners, writers, and poets. Next panel, please. Sorry, this is a lot, so I'm sorry for talking fast, but I do think some of these things are quite important to look at. The IT Act, again, is one of these very significant pieces of law that basically regulates content shared online, including online media outlets and actors, but also social media platforms. It's basically the one-stop shop for allow content to be blocked or taken down. We believe that there's very inadequate oversight and routes for appeal for this law, and as a result, you see it being used against public interest speech, such as the Kashmir Wala, where the website, Facebook, and Twitter accounts were blocked. And I mean, also later the same day, they were evicted from their office. You have the news website Gaon Savera, which was blocked. You've had journalists from the Kashmiri Wala the years before that being arrested on charges relating to the UAPA. And it's also been used to block social media accounts and the websites of Hindutva Watch, which again is looking at this weaponization of Hinduism as part of this dominant political movement as opposed to a religious movement as well. So this is a really important piece of legislation that, again, is very old, and there have been constant conversations about how it should be reformed or replaced, and that's still where we are, really. As a result, there's a number of set of rules that come off the IT Act that, again, allow the state to try and consolidate control. They've attempted to centralize fact checking within the Indian government. It required a Supreme Court or High Court, I can't remember exactly, sorry, judgment to stay that provision. But again, these are really strong demonstrations of what the state is willing to do with the legal system to try to control online speech. Next panel, please. Okay, so this is again this example of nationalizing British era law. So the penal code, again, were British colonial era laws. You can see the Indian Penal Code 1860, the Indian Evidence Act 1872, the Code of Criminal Procedure 1882. Again, I'm all for the sort of stain of British colonialism being removed, but it needs to be improved. It's not just about changing who's got the reins of power. And so in 2023, starting way before that, there was this big move to change the laws. They changed them, they gave them Hindi names. They made a big deal about this being India taking control of its legal system back. But again, when you scrutinize these reforms, you come up to some quite alarming issues. So if you go to the next slide, please. So yeah, so one of the key provisions within the penal code is the sedition clause. This was in the original penal code, which basically allows incredibly severe sentences, including life imprisonment, to those whoever by word, spoken or written, or by signed, otherwise brings or attempts to bring into hatred or contempt the government established by law. So this is basically a incredibly powerful way to demonize sort of criticism of the state. Again, Article 14 had a look at this. About 13,000 people had been charged with sedition between 2010 and 2021. In 2023, the Supreme Court ruled that this law needed to be reviewed, and it was suspended due to its impact on fundamental rights as outlined in the Indian Constitution. This was one of the reasons why they brought around some of the reforms. And so you had Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, which is one of these new reforms of the penal code. But you'll see in the language included in the BNS is basically a carbon copy of the existing sedition provision, but it's actually made far worse because it includes things like by electronic communication or by use of financial means. It's the same thing, they've just actually expanded it. This is the problem with this approach, is that they've not looked at the flaws in this law. They've not looked at the Supreme Court judgment. They like the provision. They just need it to be of their own making. And there was a lot of public announcements around the passage of these laws as part of this nationalist pride in Indian legislation. So this is still an incredibly dangerous piece of legislation. We've seen it being used against journalists. We've seen it being used against academics. We've seen it being used against commentators, especially again after the Falangam attacks. And so this is a real problem in how the legal system and legal architecture is being shaped to target people. The next panel, please. I've done quite a bit on this. I might shorten this because I realize I am running over time. Is the Broadcasting Services Regulation Bill, which has been going on for a few years. In 2023, a version of it was presented, but then they brought it back in 2024 after the general election, and it was never published openly. It was leaked. It was given to a few people, and then it was eventually leaked. This was an incredibly ambitious attempt to, again, control the regulation of online speech. It basically sought to downstream a lot of the regulatory burden on individual content creators, like YouTubers, like Instagram users, Twitter account users. The idea that they have to regulate the content that they publish. And it uncovered audiovisual and textual programming as well. It required outlets that weren't news outlets to establish committees within their organization that would approve everything that they published. It gave the government the autonomy to define the publishing and advertising codes. And it also allowed the government to build a broadcasting committee that would be the last sort of route of appeal for complaints being made against content that's being shared online. It never made it to law. It is because of a massive opposition and backlash from the opposition MPs and public and the civil society, the draft has been withdrawn. The government basically pretends it never existed. But I just wanted to give a hint of this here because it was a good archetype of what we could see in the future. We've had recent electoral victories by the BJP, Modi's party, over the last few years in regional and local elections. So obviously their power is pretty significant. We expect them to come back to this issue again. We expect them to continue trying to look at how they can control the online space and ensure that only content that they're happy with is published. And while that happens, they've got the traditional heckler's veto, which allows groups, informal groups or other groups such as the RSS to basically encourage adherence to the dominant narrative through complaints made to the government, complaints made to the platforms, complaints made online smear campaigns to try to curtail people from speaking out. I'll stop there. I've got a few other slides, but I think I've gone way over time, so I apologize for that. But happy we can maybe come back to some of these for questions afterwards, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Nick, for a very insightful discussion and for providing us an overview of the social, political, and at the same time, the legal landscape in India with respect to issues in censorship and surveillance. And at this point, we will now turn over to our second speaker, Professor Jyopi Roy Chaudhary. She will be discussing about the protection of vulnerable voices and will highlight how power, data, and technology intersect to structure online spaces and how surveillance and censorship disproportionately shape the digital experiences of minority and vulnerable communities. We can now proceed with Professor Chaudhary.
Thanks for that. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Because I'm constantly getting the low bandwidth network bandwidth message. Anyway, so some of the points that Nick made actually just directly helped me slide into what I wanted to talk about. So the topic that was given to me was what provides a stronger legal basis for pushing states to protect vulnerable communities is it the obligation to combat discrimination, or is it the obligation to uphold freedom of expression? Now, in a single, just binarily thinking, obligation to uphold freedom of expression seems to be the obvious answer here. However, there are a couple of nuances here. So I'll be focusing a little, my speech is a little bit more theoretical in nature. So the thing is that when we talk about the fact that a government has the obligation to uphold the freedom of expression, first of all, there are a couple of points that come in here. You first need to understand what is expression, right? What is expression? What are the margins, the limits of expression, right? In our constitution, we have, even in the ICCP, pick up any document, human rights document, be it national, international, there are freedoms, and then there are reasonable restrictions. Who decides what the reasonable restrictions are, or who decides the margin of this freedom of speech and expression? So coming to now, of course, Nick had mentioned that the online spaces in India seemingly are very democratized because digital payments. We have forgotten what having actual cash in your hands is, because we can quickly make payments whenever, wherever. And it's very surprising when, in fact, anyone visits from any other country and they try to transact in cash. It's a little amusing to us. Besides that, consuming any information, YouTube seemingly is democratic. You can have more information and all. However, the government comes in to block harmful content. Who decides what is harmful? Who exactly decides what is harmful? So over here, there's everyone might be aware of the book called Data Feminism, written by Catherine Ignacio and Lauren Klein. And one of the chapters in their book is what gets counted counts. So whoever has a voice gets to define what is harmful. Yeah. So I'll give you an example. I am a Hindu woman in India. Now, as a woman, of course, I belong to a vulnerable group. As a Hindu woman, I don't think so. I think that's my privilege here, right? That's what's protecting me from a lot of harm. Now, when I go online spaces are obviously not very safe for me, because I am open to a lot of, if you quickly do a Google search on me, you'll see my online presence is very, very, minuscule, because that's what I'm very worried that I'll get rape and death threats and all. And it's very common for women in India, irrespective of religion, to keep getting these kinds of hate comments. So the minute I make any opinion online, any statement online, someone's going to come in, if not outwardly just throw in an insult, they'll very comfortably say something like, go back to the kitchen, what are you doing online, all of that, tell your husband should control you, all of these things, right? And it's not very nice to have to keep dealing with the trolling. So obviously I'm a vulnerable group. However, certain state governments in the country have decided that I am a vulnerable group. But who is my aggressor here? It is the Muslim man, because if a Muslim will end up being it'll be a lost cause, right? The Hindus will lose one of their own, and I will go over that side. So there are a lot of laws for my protection from Muslim men, where if accidentally I fall into the trap of one of these Muslim men, but not from the government or not from these trollers online. So even though I have been identified as a vulnerable category, a person belonging to a vulnerable category, my aggressor has been misidentified, right? So this is where coming back to what gets counted counts. So now they have, government, state governments, in part central government, has made a big deal out of who all are attacking, or who all are the ones who need to be protected, without asking me, right? Without asking me who I need protection from. Laws have been made about me. Yes, this very paternalistic approach. I know what is best for you, right? Besides, again, with respect to expression, what kind of expression? Is it just words? Even pictures, for that matter. Any pictures, the kind of music that you listen to, all of it can be so we have obscenity law. So coming from, again, one of the colonial legacies that we carry forward and think it actually has emerged from our mindsets, are obscenity and morality laws in India. So our obscenity laws border around whatever appeals to the prurient nature, or any lascivious content appealing to the prurient nature, uh, of impressionable mind, so on and so forth. Very beautiful English. Nobody uses those words anymore. But in that, what ends up happening is any kind of expression, which means that any expression that doesn't appeal to the Hindu male Brahmin, which is our equivalent of the white man, uh, that becomes obscene, that becomes immoral. Yeah, so much so that we have a law in India to protect trafficking. So women and children are protected from trafficking. However, the law is called Prevention of Immoral Trafficking Act. First of all, what is the morality part? What is moral trafficking? Yeah, but so first, they've made it a moral and immoral act rather than a human rights violation. Trafficking is now immoral because we think that this is immoral. It's so we will protect it such. Who all are supposed to be protected in it? The persons who are trafficked. Yes, the women, the children who are trafficked into sex work generally. They are supposed to be protected. The the act says that living off of the any money made through prostitution or sex work and all of that is a crime. Yes, and therein comes the problem that, again, the vulnerable has been identified, but the protection offered is useless because the vulnerable has been made their own aggressor rather than the actual persons who are. So I mean, what I'm trying to get to is that till online, so similarly in online spaces, if you don't have enough voices being heard or being allowed an opportunity, your definitions will always be substandard. Your definitions will always be very narrow. They will serve a certain master. Laws will be made that will serve a certain master. Who did the Prevention of Immoral Trafficking Act serve? The moralistic Hindu Brahmin males who said, "We will save our daughters." Right? It did not actually save the sex workers or women. Sex workers don't need protection. Women who have been trafficked need protection. Sex workers need labor laws, which we also don't have, by the way. I mean, labor laws we have, but not for sex workers. So this becomes the central argument here, right? That how can you say what needs to be protected, what kind of protections are required, if you can't identify the basic elements? Yes. Recently, if any of you, I mean, I haven't had a chance to look at the names of the participants here, but in case you've watched, I think this is a 2023 or 24 movie called Pathan, which is a Shah Rukh Khan and Deepika Padukone starrer. Now, the one issue in that movie where everyone was clamoring for it to be banned and to be posters being burned down and all, was that there was harmful content. What was the harmful content? Not the violence, not the obscene objectification of both men and women. Yeah, earlier we used to objectify women alone on screen. Now we have progressed to objectify everybody. So that wasn't seen as harmful. What was seen as very harmful in that movie, there's this one very famous song, very hit number from that movie. In that movie, Deepika Padukone is wearing an orange bikini. This angered all the hard right wingers who said that our Bharatiya culture, our Sanskriti is being attacked. So you cannot be wearing saffron colored bikini. That is it, and that is what was harmful. So that public sentiment is not hurt. Did you ask the public if their sentiment is hurt? Did you ask what is actually hurting in the movie? Right? So these become the kind of issues. Now, coming to my next point, just give me a moment. I'll tell you what the next point was. yeah, even with respect to other, I mean, any kind of expressions, morality clauses as well, trying to govern morality and all, marginalizes queer voices, yes, trying to any kind of sexual expression, any kind of expression of gender, any kind of expression of identity in general can be targeted as immoral very quickly. All right. Now, this brings us to, so from here, I hope you understand that it is important to hear these voices, right? However, here comes something called the paradox of exposure, again, borrowing from Catherine Ignacio's book. The paradox of exposure is the voices which, I mean, the people who are most likely to be benefited from a piece of legislation or policy are also going to be most likely targeted by it, right? So the more you talk to them and say that, okay, what is your problem? Oh, acha, okay, this is the demography, these are the kind of people who live here. All right, fine, we will make a note of it. And then we will make a law regarding it. We will use exactly this law. And now we have this information before it becomes a law. We have all this data that these are where all these vulnerable people live. And now one thing that'll happen is good laws will be made for them. Another thing that'll happen is everyone will know where to target, where to lob the next hate speech missile, right? So I'll give you an example. That so I'm sitting currently in the state called Karnataka in India. So Karnataka recently wanted to do a caste census. For those of you who might not know, India, apart from being divided along lines of religion and ethnicity, we gender, of course, we are also very heavily divided on caste lines. So caste is where, so Karnataka wanted to carry out a caste census. Yes, caste is just a supposed to be a Vedic segregation of the station in life each person belongs to, and that has kind of gotten very polluted into something. It was the Varna system earlier. It's gotten very polluted into something called the caste. Now, by so every evening someone would be knocking on my door asking for my caste, asking for my religion, asking for my marital status, asking all of these deeply personal questions. And every evening I would refuse that, please, I don't want to give this information. What is your plan? What is your plan how to protect this information, right? They had no answer for that. They said, we don't know. We are government school teachers. Instead of doing our work in schools, we are doing this collection. So please, if you want to give your information, you give. Otherwise, you please let us go. And every evening this was continuing. Now this, even though I am sitting in a fairly privileged position, I wouldn't, whether or not I gave that information is irrelevant. But the problem is that under the pretext of, under the garb of making protective laws for these marginalized persons, actually, please just give me a notice at the 15-minute mark. Yeah, let me know how much time I have left. So, so under the garb of doing that, all of this information is lying with the government, ready to be misused at any moment. At any moment, anyone can come pick up all this information because there are no data protection laws. We seemingly have a data protection law, but it has not been implemented yet. It's been being implemented in phases. And so anyone can come pick up this information, use it to their advantage, use it as they please. And therein becomes your paradox of exposure, that if you expose yourself, that I need protection. You've raised your hand in a crowd. Yes, I need protection. Someone else sees where you are, and the government has no plans of trying to protect you from this harm, right? So there a second issue with online space is, if you fill up any information online, your algorithms are mostly continue to be based on binaries, and your algorithms continue to process information in a manner that uh, disadvantages marginalized communities. Yes, about done with that. So yeah, when we talk about this, there's an algorithmic visibility bias that is the main focus of data feminist studies, right? Wherein the data only says that the data only ends up looking at what is the most visible thing online, and that becomes its norm. That becomes the absolute norm. So Facebook had, where a few years ago, put up this drop down menu of, initially it had put up a drop down menu of gender, how do you identify, and that was really applauded by the queer community. And then after that, eventually it just left it blank. It had no drop down, that why should we classify, you identify yourself as you please. That was also seen as great. However, this was only for your public profile. Whoever's seeing your profile gets to see how you identify. Facebook doesn't believe in that identification system. Facebook, when you sign up, when you log in, we've all created our accounts very long ago. We don't remember this. But even today, if you go try to create a new account just for this exercise, you either have to be a male or a female. This, again, this information is out on the internet. The algorithm, not your personal information, but this algorithm exists. And now the internet believes sincerely that there is a male category and there is a female category. What is gender queer? What is trans? Right? Imagine if this metadata is being used for any kind of protection laws, if this metadata is being used for any kind of policy making, what would that look like? Between men and women, male, female, there is one marginalized group. Yeah. But there are so many other vulnerable communities which completely get hidden. Yes. So it's just the way data is organized and consumed and sold and distributed. It affects how laws and policies and even our own perceptions get formed. And that is very dangerous, right? It's not that it's not been happening offline. It has been happening offline, uh, for a very long time. But this has now shifted to online, and online information travels much faster. So that is what makes it even more dangerous. So I would just like to end with, before we talk about how states can protect, we first need to understand, we need to ask these hard questions, that what do you want regulated exactly? Yes. What exactly is harmful? And only who exactly is vulnerable? Yeah, like I said, that I'm vulnerable, but from whom? So these questions, till we don't answer, I think it's very dangerous to even start trying to form a policy really around it. Yeah. So that's my 2 cents on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chaudhary, for highlighting essential questions when we talk about freedom of expression, and at the same time, the obligation to prevent discrimination, especially in the context of marginalized communities or vulnerable groups. And now we will turn over to our third speaker for this panel, Professor Danilo Arau. He will be talking to us about the experiences of critical journalists and media workers who are at the receiving end of state-sponsored repression, as the culture of impunity has become increasingly normalized. Professor Arau, you have the floor with you.
Okay. Good evening from the Philippines, and we will talk about the news media organization to which I belong, because aside from being a professor of journalism, I'm also a practicing journalist. Next slide, please, Carla. Okay, so what is bulat-lat? It's a Filipino term which means to expose or to unearth. And part of the responsibility of bulat-lat is to report on something that is underreported in what we call the dominant media, or what Noam Chomsky describes as the corporate media, and that is human rights reporting. Unfortunately, and this is one of the glaring ironies in the Philippines, and which may also be reflective of the situation in India and other parts of the world, human rights violations are quite rampant, but unfortunately, there is very, very little reportage or coverage on the part of many journalists and media workers. And in Bulatlat, that's what we've tried to do since 2001. So this year, incidentally, is our 25th year of doing this. Okay, next slide, please. So that's what we do. We've been covering various aspects of human rights violations. Of course, we focus more on Philippine realities. Although our audiences are quite big, we cater to an international audience as well. And this partly explains why most of our output are in English. There are a few Filipino language reports. For example, I write my column in the Filipino language, but we focus more internationally. And that also explains why what's happening in Iran, in Palestine, Venezuela, and other countries that are victimized by genocidal wars and other forms of human rights violations, we also cover that. Now, because of the focus of our reportage or coverage, next slide, please. Okay, we need a team of dedicated journalists who can really get the job done. And since this is International Women's Month, I want to proudly say that even if I'm a man, Bulatlat is dominated by female journalists. And actually, the bravery of the reporters comes from the fact that, they're women. They know how to multitask. I hope I'm not stereotyping women in any way. It's just that the editor-in-chief right now, whose picture you see there, we were given the award of distinction 4 years ago. We, agreed that while there are men who helped set up the news media organization like me, we would prefer that we become more led, better led by women. And while I'm already 58 years old, much of our members are quite young. We are more focused on human rights. We are very much adherents of the highest standards of journalism ethics, and we try our best to be professional despite the financial limitations of being identified as an alternative news media organization. That's what makes Bulatlat different because we are really non-profit. We don't want to get in advertisements because that would be a potential conflict of interest for the report that we do. And besides, no corporation or no big company or no big investor would support human rights reporting, especially in a situation where much of the perpetrators of human rights violations come from the rich and powerful. So sometimes I get asked the question, how are we able to survive if we have if we have very little finances to begin with? The answer there is simple. We practice our journalism without expecting anything in return. I mean, as a professor, I earn my own income as a teacher, but as a journalist, I do things for free. So I've been with Bulatlat for about 25 years, for more than 25 years now, but I haven't gotten any salary whatsoever. And that's how things work in our news media organization. Now, last point before we go to the next slide. Our level of professionalism is proven by our accreditation from the Journalism Trust Initiative of the Reporters Without Borders. So this is important because if other corporations, they proudly talk about their ISO ratings and other, dominant corporate ratings, in journalism, we have the JTI or the Journalism Trust Initiative. We are the first in the Philippines to be given the accreditation by this particular entity. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, why are we forever fighting? Because aside from practicing a kind of journalism that is more focused on human rights, we expect government to just, allow us to practice the kind of journalism we want, because the our own constitution states that freedom of the press shall be inviolable. Okay, no law shall be passed that would abridge basic freedoms, including freedom of the press. But the irony there is that we've been accused of several things by the government. I put it in quotation marks just so I don't misquote the government in any way. We have a National Telecommunications Commission which accused us of being affiliated to or supporting terrorists and terrorist organizations. We've also been harassed online. Our two speakers talked about being trolled, being doxxed, or being bashed online. For us, it's an ordinary Tuesday. If we, get such vile comments or vile remarks for the work that we do. Now, I want to introduce one particular word that is quite internal in the Philippines. You can call it Filipino English word. It's called red tagging. Red tagging refers to a situation where you are accused of being members of the Communist Party of the Philippines, which is essentially a revolutionary movement, just like the Maoist movement in the Communist Party of India. And it's Maoist in orientation. Let's be clear about that. Now, what's wrong with being accused or being red tagged because the color of the communist is red, right? From our experience, and the data would prove this, several activists and journalists have been arrested, detained, or even murdered if you get accused of being a communist. So it puts a target on your back if you are being red tagged. And again, for Bullet Lab, it's been red tagged as an institution. And us as individuals working for the news media organization, we've been red tagged as well. So that's why we need to take extraordinary measures to ensure the safety and security, not just of ourselves, but also of our family members and our loved ones. So we have to ensure that we get the work done, but at the same time, we protect ourselves, and at the same time, we also fight those who try to harass us, even if such situation includes fighting our own government, which is supposed to protect us. We take consolation from the fact that we are protected by the freedom-loving people, and not just in the Philippines, but also internationally. I want to direct your attention to this particular website that I've included here. It's a screenshot from the Philippine News Agency, just to tell you how bad things are. The Philippine News Agency is a state-owned media company. It's run by the government. So basically, it follows whatever government wants to publish. It doesn't have any editorial independence, and they do not practice real journalism in the strictest sense of the word. So it's a bit ironic that they are now accusing our organization and other news media organizations of promoting terrorism. But to tell you the truth, a few years ago, because I'm a professor of journalism, I was once a consultant of that particular news media organization because they wanted to improve their journalism. I tried to recommend several things to them, including editorial independence. You can be state-owned but be independent at the same time. I gave them several recommendations on what should be done. They ignored my recommendations and they stopped inviting me to the meetings. And then after that, they accused me. They accused my organization, and I won't flash any more other things they've written about me, but they've also accused me of being a communist because they ignored some things that I told them to do. Yeah, just to tell you how weird our government is. Anyway, so next slide, please, Carla. Okay, yeah. So we're fighting. So they tried to censor us because the National Telecommunications Commission blocked our website for a while. They blocked us because of the alleged links with terrorism. So we went to court. And the good news is just a few months, just last December, December last year, we were able to get a favorable ruling from the court that unblocked our website. So finally, we can breathe a sigh of relief that the government cannot block us anymore. But it took a long time for the court to decide on the case that we filed. Had we not filed the case, you can access our website from there in London or in India or whatever, but in our very own country, you cannot access us. So that was the situation in the past. But now, we were able to, file a case in court and we won that particular case. Incidentally, in 2019, that's a picture of me, in front of the Hall of Justice in a local court here in Quezon City. It's near Manila, the capital of the Philippines. So that particular picture has to do with a separate case because we were subjected to cyber attacks. It's called DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks. The objective is to overrun the servers to the point where you cannot access the website anymore. So we had that difficulty in 2019, but because of the help of various technology-oriented corporations and other concerned citizens, we were able to trace the hackers. And apparently, in one case, it was perpetrated by 2 private companies. And in another instance, that's why there's another graphic there with men in military uniform. We found out that the Philippine Army tried to do penetration testing of our website. So we were able to get the digital forensic evidence. But even up to now, the military still denies trying to hack us. But, well, we have the evidence to prove otherwise. So we're fighting always on an everyday basis. Okay, next slide, please, Carla. Okay, so, with the limited time that I have, I won't mention anymore the normative standards of journalism. But when we say that we stand for the truth, we try our best to provide not just factual accuracy, but contextual accuracy. And you need that in human rights reporting because people might get drowned by statistics. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with statistics. But, there is a saying in social science research, numbers numb. I mean, statistics are there, they're useful information, but we have to look at the context in which why such big numbers happen and why one human rights violation is already one too many. So it doesn't matter if it's one journalist killed or 10 or 100 or 1,000. One journalist killed is already an indication of impunity because why is it happening in the first place? And we try to stand for the marginalized and the underrepresented. To be honest with you, there's nothing ideological or left-leaning or right-leaning about standing for marginalized and underrepresented because in theory, journalism is supposed to give a voice to the voiceless. I mean, all journalism theoreticians tend to agree that those who have less in life should have more in terms of law, in terms of media, and actually governments would sometimes proclaim that they are for the poor, for the marginalized, right? So in the same way, in journalism, when we try to give a voice to the voiceless, it means that we try our best to give a voice to the victims of human rights violations. So it's not anathema, or it's not contradictory to being objective in journalism, because you try to get all possible sides of the story, but you frame your story in a way that amplifies the voiceless. Now, what we want to emphasize here is that we believe that you cannot be neutral in the practice of journalism. Objective, definitely it is needed. Perhaps later on we can discuss the theory behind objectivity and neutrality if there is a need for more clarification on that point. But for now, please allow me to go to the next slide. Beyond reporting, yes, based on the experience that we've had, that we've gone through from 2001 onwards, we haven't touched on the various instances of legal struggles and other challenges we faced. I just gave you two very recent cases of what we have to go through. But through the years, we've been defending press freedom, we've been conducting training, and based on our experience, we've published several books. The most recent is Digital Security Policy and Guidelines for Filipino Journalists. It's for free. If you can do a quick Google search, you can download it. We don't, as I told you, we don't want to profit from anything. So whatever we produce, we do things for free. And besides, I'm an academic and I believe in open access of knowledge. We also do campaigns. That one, Free Frenchie May Kumpyo. Let me just translate. Tagapagbalita means journalist. Hindi terorista means not a terrorist. So Frenchie is a journalist. She is not a terrorist. Why is she there? Because she's our colleague and she's been red tagged, and fortunately she wasn't killed, but she was arrested and detained. In 2020, she was charged with illegal possession of firearms. That was dismissed. She was charged with murder. That was also dismissed already. Of course, you would ask, why is she still in prison? Because she got convicted, unfortunately. It's called terrorist financing. The accusation was that she was helping fund terrorist organizations, which is weird because, as I told you, alternative news media organizations don't earn any money from their practice. But the accusation was that she got 100,000 pesos and that she delivered it to the communists, which is not true, by the way. It's a long story, but I can tell you more details perhaps later. Okay, if there are questions. Now, the last slide I want to stress here is that since we want to talk about technology, there have been improvements through the years for Bulatlat. And the only thing that I want to talk about technology is that we maximized technology in 2001 when the internet was still at its relative infancy. There was still low penetration rate here in the Philippines, but we tried our best to make our presence felt. And we've improved technologically through the years, and we've maximized it. Unfortunately, the internet is also being weaponized, just like the laws of the land. I mean, even libel is supposed to be, in theory, a good check and balance mechanism for responsible journalism, but libel has been used as a weapon to silence the media. So these are the things that we have to go through as we celebrate our anniversary. It's supposed to be a happy anniversary. We debated, by the way, as to whether we should put happy there because things are never really too happy when you talk about media repression. So, yeah. So those are some of the things that we have to go through in order to uphold and promote not just press freedom, but also the human rights of the marginalized and the underrepresented. So we will now go to the most important slide. So thank you very much. That's my favorite slide because that's the end of our discussion. Maraming salamat. Thank you.
Maraming salamat. Thank you so much, Professor Arao. And now we will have our Q&A session. So we have a question that's directed to Nick. The question is, AI and tech in relation to surveillance is extremely complicated and requires expertise. However, even when independent experts produce their reports, they fail to have evidentiary value. Through the bureaucracy, take the example of the Arsenal reports, Sentinel-1 and BK-116. How then can the rule of law be upheld in this rapidly developing area of law?
Thank you. I'm not aware of the Arsenal reference in terms of AI. I don't know about that. Obviously, I think it was more of a digital forensic work, sort of looking at the hard drive work. But I think obviously, I mean, AI makes a lot of this stuff a lot more complex because obviously it is. I mean, surveillance systems, like Pegasus, like those natively developed by a state, are black box by design. We don't know how they work. They don't know what protections they have in place, what requirement for judicial oversight, things like that. AI is a black box. So, obviously, AI-enabled surveillance would be a black box within a black box. And obviously, a lot of the points that Dr. Chowdhury talked about in terms of discrimination and who chooses and who's counted, that is really magnified in AI in terms of the test data and things like that. So I think this is going to be a real landmark issue for how these technologies evolve. I would also just be careful just to make sure that we're not focus on the AI aspect and ignoring the other issues, because there's so much damage that can be done online without using AI. I mean, for example, the last Indian general election, everyone believed would be the sort of AI election, that it would totally decimate the idea of a free and fair election and good reporting. But a lot of the analysis after the election said that AI did not play as big a role as people feared. The vast majority of the disinformation and misinformation shared around the election was good old-fashioned disinformation and misinformation. It was, sort of manually manipulated content or or content that's been removed from its proper context or things like that. So, and I think sometimes when we're expecting something, we may miss the other sort of the other issues. And obviously, AI is the dominant issue of discussion at the moment. We must make sure that focus doesn't distract us from other aspects. Not to say that there's not a problem. I think there definitely is a problem, but we need to make sure that we're looking at the entire landscape. But I think it will make journalists work harder. Obviously, AI can be used to further what all of us have talked about, the idea of smear campaigns. And also, I mean, as Professor Adao talked about, red tagging, is one of the most horrific tactics we're seeing in the Philippines at the moment. And obviously things like this, so how can that be, totally sort of amplified through automated technology, especially as the costs plummet, so everyone can get access to this stuff to use it for nefarious ends. And we need a framework in place to protect that. And as I've shown with India, I don't particularly think India has a framework to protect against that, and many countries don't. So I think it is a challenge, but we need to make sure we're looking at the whole picture.
Thank you, Nick. Our second question is for Dr. Arao. The earlier speaker spoke about Pegasus software being used in India to target dissident voices. As a journalist, are there concerns the Filipino government may be using Pegasus or other tech?
Yes. We didn't have time to talk about Pegasus, but yes, if it's a source of worry in other countries, we're also worried about not just Pegasus, but also other technologies. I don't want to mention a particular country, but since it is very controversial right now, allow me to mention technology coming from Israel that has been used for surveillance operations, at least in the Philippines. I'm not sure about India. I don't have information about the technology that's used there. And that's why that's also something that we worry about. And the problem with the Philippines is that we have laws that should be protecting basic human rights, even freedom of the press. Things are written well in the Constitution. That's why the Philippines is labeled as the freest press in Asia, or one of the freest press in Asia. But what's written is not necessarily the one that's being followed. So that's what's concerning about the Philippines. The system is broken. We can talk about elections for all we care, but people have become so disillusioned that, sometimes the hope goes beyond elections, because it will be practically the same people running the government, and they will still use certain surveillance mechanisms that have been established before, and they will continue it here. So that's the perspective of many journalists as well as other freedom-loving people.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ralph. And I have a question also to Professor Chaudhry, given that your background on transformative constitutionalism and what you mentioned during your discussion a while ago. So in India, where the state often invokes national security to justify state surveillance, does the obligation to combat discrimination provide a stronger legal shield against such broad power than the right to freedom of expression, which is more easily curtailed or limited by reasonable restrictions?
Okay, I'm sorry, I was having a network error. Is it possible to type
Yes.
out the question? Yeah, I heard it in bits and pieces.
The question is quite long, so is it okay if I can just repeat?
Yeah,
the
please
question?
repeat it. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Sure. So my question a while
Hopefully,
ago
I'll
was,
end up with this. Yeah.
does the obligation to combat discrimination provide a stronger legal shield against such broad power than the right to freedom of expression, which is more easily curtailed or limited by reasonable restrictions?
Okay. All right. So the thing is that as per our constitution, there aren't a lot of positive obligations as such on the state as there are negative. So in this, what that means is that you don't have to go door to door providing rights, but if your rights are curtailed, then in that case, you will be able. I mean, those are justiciable. So basically, you can go to the court, and I mean, you can get justice. So there is technically no obligation to combat discrimination as such, but there is the freedom of speech and expression that is built into the very fundamental rights. So and again, combating discrimination comes with the same set of issues that I had mentioned earlier. um, that discrimination from whom, against whom? Because right now, if uh, you understand that we all have a habit of arranging all information in binaries, even in our minds, not just in algorithms. Even our minds process information in binaries. Even when we try to constantly categorize. So when we're looking at discrimination, or that who is the obligation to combat discrimination, what kind of discrimination? So the meta narrative going on in the country right now is that the majority, the privileged class, are being discriminated by those who are asking for rights, basically. Yeah. So every time I am not able to make my opinion, which may be a bit of propaganda mixed with Hindutva feelings, pro-right and all. If I'm not able to make those statements, if someone attacks me, then I say my rights are, you have an obligation to protect me from discrimination. And the government will come in and say, yes, you're right. Where is this hate comment you got? And they will get it deleted, right? So it can work both ways. And currently it is not working in the favor of dissenters. It is not working in the favor of marginalized or vulnerable communities. So unfortunately, I the same problem that plagues protecting or upholding speech and expression is the same problem plaguing you have to be protected from discrimination. Also remember that the state protection, by the way, leads to heavier regulation and surveillance, which again leads to the paradox of exposure. So I'm not very sure which one is better at the moment.
Thank you so much. And perhaps just to wrap up our Q&A session, I have a last question to all our speakers, and you can give your thoughts on this question. So the question is, when regulating online activity, how do we strike a balance between ensuring sufficient protections against misinformation, which can be harmful to human rights, but also those needed to ensure that the government does not go too far? So maybe we can start with Nick, and then Professor Chaudhry and Dr. Arrow.
Thank you. I'm going to be a bit dull and sort of say that you can't legislate away misinformation and disinformation. It's impossible. Ever since speech has started, ever since we learned to talk, we've told lies, we've propagated information for our own benefit. What we can do is ensure that it doesn't take hold. So funding, like the work that Professor Adao talked about with his organization, with independent media in India. You need to build people to be able to scrutinize and challenge and know where they can seek high quality information. So I think there's a challenge, and we see governments all the time talking about getting rid of disinformation. That often translates to getting rid of content they don't like. And then when talking about what Dr. Chowdhury talked about in terms of minority groups or those who are discriminated against, again, their speech may be defined as misinformation, disinformation to avoid actually addressing these inequalities in law. Regulation is hard, and there are some examples of it looking a bit better. The DSA in Europe is not bad. It's not perfect by any means, but there is a certain way of looking at approaching it in a manner that can protect free speech, but also the way of engaging with as many people as possible. So it's not just a top-down sort of set of rules established by the political elite that is actually built with users, different groups in mind, different identities in mind. But it's a long process, and it also includes education, funding of public interest media, protection of dissidents, protection of a very loud, multi-voice civic space. So there's never a silver bullet, unfortunately.
Professor Chaudhry?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, it's very dangerous that in India, disinformation is clothed in misinformation and then passed around, so that it's even harder to detect. And it's done, I mean, we've become very good at it. So I think at a personal level, I think the best thing you can do is, and maybe this is coming from the space that, I mean, I feel comfortable giving this suggestion because I'm an academic. So the one thing to do is research. So no matter what WhatsApp message or video that you watch, I think at a personal level, the best way to protect from this would definitely be to at least look for 3 other sources that say the same thing. And the sources don't mean Reddit or Wikipedia, right? Like actually look at maybe some independent news agencies, definitely, right? So maybe that would be a good way to go about trying to kind of corroborate the information. But apart from that, I mean, it is tedious. Yes, it's second nature to me. But then I can absolutely understand that it sounds very tedious to somebody who's quickly just consuming their morning WhatsApp video sort of set, and they start. I mean, right now, disinformation is all around. Anything the US president says, you have to fact check that. You can't believe what he's saying, right? I mean, so yeah, I mean, right now, just keeping your guard up is possibly the best thing. That's what I do. But at a national or even at a regional level, I'm not very sure how else to proceed currently.
Dr. Arau?
Yes, I agree that we cannot legislate disinformation or any other form of media content. I do remember in 2017, one senator tried to file an anti-fake news bill, and we were very, very quick to oppose it. And right now, these suggestions are being used as an excuse to fight fake news or disinformation. No, as mentioned by the two speakers, we need media literacy and media education. Number two, we need continuous engagement with the platform owners, with the social media platform owners like Zuckerberg and Musk, because the press freedom absolutism espoused by X right now, formerly Twitter, doesn't really work well. When you pit a fake news spreader with a truth teller, the truth will really be drowned out because of the virality of disinformation, because it appeals more to the emotion rather than the objective appreciation of social reality. So those are the things that we need to remember. And of course, on a more theoretical level, we also need to instill to the public that there is a difference between censorship that's being promoted by the government and responsible gatekeeping. That should be the order of the day in any newsroom. So, in responsible gatekeeping, we try our best to encourage social media platform owners to really delete the accounts of those who spread this information, because that is part of gatekeeping. That is not censorship. But the fake news spreaders would tend to put it the other way around. They would claim to be harassed and intimidated whenever they are put in their proper places. And sometimes there is a role reversal of sorts, similar to what Trump does to legitimate news media organizations. Anything that goes against his narrative, they are all fake news purveyors. We are experiencing that right now. To some extent, I think Modi is also doing that in India, although I don't want to comment on the media system in India because our colleagues are in a better position to do so. So these things are happening. And again, our weapon of choice is self-regulation in the media rather than government regulation, where they will determine what is the truth, what is disinformation. That's very dangerous for the Philippines based on our experience, and for the world as well. Thank you. Maraming salamat.
Thank you very much to all our speakers for a very enlightening and insightful discussion and a very timely and relevant topic. And that wraps up our last panel for the Human Rights in Asia conference. And now I will turn over the microphone to Dr. Sanay Fujita.
Okay, thank you, Carla. Thank you very much for all the speaker. I'm Dr. Sanay Fujita, who has been supervising this organizing team. I'm really glad that all this 3 days conference finished very successfully. I appreciate all the speakers who made effort to find time and prepare such a great talk. Thank you very much. And thank you for all the participants who stayed such a long day, and especially from Asia. Thank you very much. And I think that some people missed day one, last Saturday, which we also had very good speakers. And we have this website about Human Rights Asia conference. So the final report of this year will be uploaded. And if you're interested, we already have 18th year record of this conference. So please look at this website. I think our member sent you the link to your chat. Then this year's final report will be uploaded, and I think the video will be uploaded as well. So if you missed the day one, please have a look. And so that's all. from me, and thank you very much. And I really appreciate the support from Human Rights Center, Professor Kara, and the conference team as well. And I really like to congratulate all the student teams. Great work. Thank you very much. And please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fujita. So as we bring the 18th Annual Human Rights in Asia Conference to a close, we reflect on our rigorous interrogation of this year's theme, which is Human Rights, Technology, and Development. And for the past 3 days, this year's conference has interrogated the connectivity paradox and the tension between the promise of technological advancement and the reality of the deepening inequalities and relevant issues on surveillance and exclusion. Before we conclude, the organizing team of the 18th Human Rights in Asia Conference extends its deepest gratitude to our keynote speaker, Professor Bum Sok Bae of the Advisory Committee of the UN Human Rights Council, and all our distinguished speakers from our 4 expert panels who guided us through these complex intersections on gender discrimination and AI, the expanding digital divide, the role of national human rights institutions, and surveillance and censorship. We would also like to thank our participants and attendees joining us both here in person at Colchester and online from across the globe. Your engagement, questions, and diverse perspectives have breathed life into these discussions, moving toward the shared rights-based roadmap for Asia's digital future, shifting the narrative from passive connectivity to active empowerment and protection. We also thank the support given by the University of Essex Law School and the Essex Human Rights Center in organizing this conference. A special acknowledgement also goes to our academic supervisor for this year's conference, Dr. Sanay Fujita, who oversaw the formation and academic direction of this conference. Once again, thank you all for your contributions to this vital and timely conversations.